Romantic Tales. Chapter 121. The beautiful young man provocatively raised his chin, his delicate face showing no intention. This partner of mine can only be ordered around by me. Royal brother seems to have forgotten, this isn't the capital but Armament City. However, it doesn't matter, I'm very much looking forward to royal brother's arrival. Baligaju didn't speak. All of his emotions were concealed under that exquisite and luxurious silver mask. Although Hellion Vivian very much wanted the young man to remove that arm of his. But after that scene just now, Hellion Vivian had a deeper understanding of Baligaju's danger. It was very clear that the current her, no matter whether it was martial chi or attack power, was inferior to him by a large margin. Someone as smart as him, if she revealed even a little bit of herself, Baligaju might suspect her. At that time she wouldn't be as lucky as when she was in the capital. A Baligaju without martial chi was already frightening enough. If he recovered now, then he would truly be unfathomable. Therefore Hellion Vivian felt that it was better for her not to try to break a stone with an egg. Cooperating with the young man's act, at least she wouldn't be caught immediately. Just as she was thinking, Hellion Vivian suddenly felt her shoulder lighten. Puzzled, she slightly raised her eyes and unexpectedly discovered that Baligaju was holding that beautiful young man's arm, his deep eyes looking deeply at her, brimming with ice-cold danger. The always indifferent Hellion Vivian, under that kind of gaze, unexpectedly had some indescribable feelings. Perhaps it was because she was pretending right now, so she had a bit of a guilty conscience. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes, unable to see his face, only his feet. It was obviously the same person from before. But the current him seemed to be emitting a kind of invisible pressure, pressuring her until she couldn't breathe. Suddenly he directly shook off that young man's arm and reached out to pull her over. But only the sound of the door opening was heard. It seemed that the entire inn followed along and started to tremble. Baligaju didn't care at all about the young man behind him, taking the drunk Weiwei and walking out of the room. The pretty boy wanted to chase after them, but he was firmly bound in place by a red light. Fire Qilin? The beautiful young man looked at the faintly discernible red-haired man, and his eyes suddenly shook. You're back? Does that mean that his martial chi has completely recovered? The Fire Qilin didn't say anything. Sometimes it was as cold as its master. In any case, its current mission was to trap young Master Han, so that he would not go and cause trouble for its master. It did not need to care about anything else. However, what it didn't expect was that the beautiful young man laughed evilly. Do you think that by trapping me your master won't be in danger? It's exactly the opposite. Think about it carefully. Even I can get the news and know that Imperial Brother has come to Armament City, let alone those old fogies from the 4 great clans. If I were you, I'd rush out right now and not stand here wasting time. Imperial Brother should have just recovered his martial chi, right? Are you sure he's fine by himself? The Fire Qilin's eyes darkened as it suddenly thought of something. Just as it was about to fly out, it realized that its master had just given it an order that it must carry out. The so-called order that must be carried out meant that no matter what happened, it had to carry out the order to the end. In other words, it simply couldn't leave this place even half a step. But master, The Fire Qilin clenched its fists and looked outside the inn, but not even half a shadow could be seen. It was raining. The raindrops followed the tiles and dripped onto the bluestone path. Patter, patter. Baligaju stood in the rain, his clean clothes not the slightest bit messy. Baligaju slightly turned his eyes to look at her, the corners of his lips slightly raised. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What else could it be? He spent so much effort to catch her, wasn't it just to teach her a lesson? Heh. Baligaju suddenly chuckled. In addition to the usual coldness, there was also an extremely oppressive danger, as if he had broken out from the depths of hell. This highness sometimes really wants to break your arms and legs and tie them to the door. You should know that disobedient prey should be more obedient without its claws. Chapter 122. Baligaju hated Hellion Vivian to the bone, but when he saw her he felt that it was better to let her be alive and kicking. Before this, Baligaju also didn't feel that Hellion Vivian was anything special to him. She was merely a prey that he caught on a whim. Only this prey was too disobedient. He had no choice but to catch her himself. As a result, before he even reached Armament City, she already had a partner. She even showed her true face to the other party. Right now, Beligaju only felt that he wanted to smear this little face in front of him and make her obediently stay by his side. No matter what method he had to use. Beligaju's deep pair of phoenix eyes were like ancient ponds. Hellion Vivian heard this and her eyes tightened. He still said that he wasn't cruel. This was even more perverted than killing her or cutting her flesh. However, this lord has already chosen you to be this lord's princess consort. Beligaju looked at her and suddenly changed the topic. His tone was indifferent as he continued to say, "This lord doesn't have a hobby of killing my own princess consort." Princess consort? Hellion Vivian frowned. What was he thinking? Could it be that he really wanted to choose her to be his princess consort? She definitely wouldn't think that this black-bellied and fickle man would only want her. No one could say that they hadn't played enough one second and then say she's his princess consort the next. Unless, retired emperor is pressuring you very much? Hellion Vivian thought of the current situation. The emperor was muddle-headed all day long. Even if retired emperor was powerful, he was already old. Now that the 4 great clans were pressuring him, he wasn't young anymore. If he didn't get married soon, perhaps there would really be some kind of homosexual rumor spreading. At that time, the people of the 4 great clans would have even more reason to not let him inherit the throne. After all, a prince who wouldn't even have an heir was equivalent to a cripple. That's why retired emperor was so anxious to let him choose a princess consort. And he himself also wouldn't be unaware of this point. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, her eyes drooped slightly. She looked lazy, as if even the iciness that she had just emitted gave people a hazy illusion. In modern times, she had disguised herself and infiltrated the mafia. She had used this trick to deceive countless big shots. But Bailey Jiaju didn't fall for her trick. His black and white eyes looked at her meaningfully, giving people a kind of invisible pressure. Hellion Vivian truly felt that chatting with the 3rd prince was more tiring than discussing several business deals. However, as long as he understood what the other party wanted, he would be able to do it. Only then could they cooperate. That's right, it was cooperation. From the very beginning, Hellion Vivian didn't want to be enemies with this man. If she had a choice, she wouldn't have angered him. After all, in the Dragon War Empire, relationships were inextricably linked. The 3rd prince was definitely a man who could not be underestimated. She needed to form an alliance with people. And he obviously needed a princess consort. Hellion Vivian raised her head. When she looked at Beligaju again, her eyes were calm. "I know that you really need a princess consort right now, and I also have something that I need." Beligaju lowered his eyes. What did she mean by he really needed a princess consort? "We can cooperate," Hellion Vivian slowly said. "As for retired emperor, I can help you deal with him and I can also cooperate with you." "Cooperate?" Beligaju coldly pulled down his thin lips, hinting her to continue. He wanted to hear what she meant by cooperation. Hellion Wei saw that he was interested and laughed along with him. Her voice also became more confident. "I can marry you, but don't worry, I won't restrict you. You can do whatever you want to do, you don't have to care about me at all. Wait until the retired emperor's side is dealt with. You've also dealt with the 4 great clans and smoothly ascended the throne. Just divorce me and let me leave the palace. At that time, if you really like someone, then marry her. I won't stick to you at all and won't have any delusions." Hellion Vivian believed that as long as she said so, the other party would definitely agree. After all, Beligaju was only looking for a shield. She just happened to bump into his reverse scale. Hellion Vivian didn't know how she provoked the 3rd prince to see her as an eyesore. However, since she couldn't escape no matter what, he might as well cooperate with him and act out a play. It was better than being like now, where he was looking for trouble everywhere. As long as they agreed on the conditions, it wouldn't affect her at all. Not only that, their goal was the same as the enemy. She wanted to take back what belonged to her, so she had to go against those old fogies from the 4 great clans. And he must hate them to the bone. When the time came, the 2 of them would work together and do what they needed to do, then go their separate ways. No one would get in the way of the other. How good would that be? Why didn't she think of this point before? The 3rd prince should also be satisfied with this suggestion. Sure enough, as soon as Hellion Wei's voice fell, a rather deep and low voice sounded from the other side. It's just that within that voice was brewing a heavy and icy chill. Listening to it, there was actually a bit of coldness. "This is really a good suggestion." These few words were said very casually by Beligaju. The gaze that he looked at Hellion Vivian was also lazy and indifferent. However, his long and slender fingers, which were hidden under his robes, slightly clenched together. You even solved the thing that this highness is most worried about. Not sticking to this highness, ha. Hellion Vivian's thin lips raised. What the third prince should be afraid of is that there is a woman sticking to you. This highness didn't know that you would understand this highness so well. Beligaju said word by word, his fingertips almost sinking into his palms. This damned woman really knew how to provoke him. Should he praise her for being smart, or should he just strangle her to death so that she wouldn't say another word and make him angry? Hellion Vivian had a comforting expression and patted Bailey Jiajia's shoulder. I also understand the feeling of being forced to marry. Although she was a special agent in modern times, it was inevitable that her subordinates would hurry to get married. You are so sincere that this highness would feel a pity if he didn't agree. Suddenly, Beligaju laughed and lowered his body little by little. Since we want to cooperate, this highness also has a condition. Hellion Vivian was stunned. She thought that what she said was what he wanted. Could it be that there was something that she didn't think of? Stay away from other people. Beligaju's voice was faint, as if he was just stating a fact. This highness doesn't like to see this highness's princess pulling and pulling other people. It has a bad influence. This was easy. Hellion Vivian also understood. If she really became the third princess, she would definitely be targeted by many people and find fault with her. In ancient times, reputation was very important, so it was normal for him to make such a request. Okay, I will remember. Hellion Vivian smiled gently. I also have a condition. Beligaju coldly pulled down his thin lips. This little fox really didn't eat a loss at all. Speak. Chapter 123. Hellion Vivian's thin lips were half-hooked. If your highness has someone you like, just tell me. I can give up my position at any time. Don't hide it from me. Cooperation was cooperation. She didn't want to be someone else's third party and block arrows for others. Give up my position at any time. Beligaju's eyes were cold to the extreme. The side of his face with the silver mask didn't show the slightest bit of happiness or anger. His slender fingers hanging under his sleeves tightened little by little. The black jade thumb ring that was almost crushed revealed his current mood. You are very magnanimous. Hellion Vivian was stunned and then said with a smile, Your Highness will meet someone you like one day. At that time, Your Highness doesn't need to be embarrassed. Just tell me. Moreover, who didn't want to hold the world with the person they liked? At that time, with the throne in his hand, he shouldn't need her anymore. There were countless beauties in the harem, plus the harem girls that were sent into the palace. There would be one that he liked. She didn't want to rely on the position of princess and compete with those women for the position of empress. That would make her become unbearably fierce. Not to mention that her ambition wasn't here. She wanted to conquer the stars and the sea. How could she be trapped by a small palace? With so many women trying to win the favor of a man who didn't love her, she felt tired just thinking about it. You're really thoughtful. Beligaju looked at her deeply. With a smile that wasn't a smile, there was a bit of ridicule. Even this king doesn't know when I will meet someone I like. You're really thinking far ahead. Her words were for him, but in fact, this little thing with unsteady claws was just leaving a way out for herself. Again and again she emphasized that she didn't care if he went to find someone else. At that time, as long as he followed the agreement and let her go, it was fine. Beligaju clenched his hands. He felt like there was a piece of flint pressing down on his chest. It was so heavy that even when he was angry it was a bit painful. In the end, Beligaju gave a deep smile and a trace of coldness flashed through his eyes. Did he marry a princess just to let her go one day? Should he say that her calculations were too good, or should he say that she was deliberately angering him? One more thing. Hellion Vivian saw the smile on his face and thought that he was in a good mood. She hesitated for a while and decided to bring up the last point. Beligaju faintly replied, There's more? He wanted to hear what else she had to say. We can't be husband and wife. Hellion Vivian didn't feel that the third prince was interested in her, but men were animals that thought with the lower half of their bodies. For the sake of insurance, it was better to make things clear first. Hearing this, the black jade ring on Beligaju's thumb completely shattered. Crack! A crisp sound rang out. His voice echoed in the deserted alley. Coupled with the cold raindrops, it was exceptionally ear-piercing. The candlelight in the distance flickered. The rain was bone-chilling, but Beligaju was not aware of it. He didn't even move. He only gracefully stood in the dark, slightly wrinkling his thick eyebrows. After that, he opened his hand and the powder of the ring drifted with the wind into the rain. Then a very light, shallow smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Like the spring breeze in March, it lightly brushed past, but after brushing past it was cold. Do you think that I'm such a picky eater? Without being husband and wife, this woman didn't want him to touch her that much? Or could it be that she was keeping her virginity for someone? Beligaju lowered those black eyes that were as deep as an ancient pool. His pupils seemed to have precipitated many stormy waves. He thought that after so many years, his ruthlessness had already been polished away. Even his happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy seemed to have become more and more lacking. But as it happened, yet he had encountered such a daring little thing. At first Helian Wei Wei thought that she had said something that angered him. Now that she heard what he said, the corners of her mouth twitched. I'm not that bad looking. If she didn't deliberately smear her face, she would still be pretty. Who gave you this kind of wrong impression? Beligaju coldly raised his eyebrows. The light in his eyes that looked at her even carried a little bit of disdain. Helian Vivian was stunned by his question. This time she really felt that the third prince wouldn't do anything to her. She then said, "All right, let's not talk about appearances first. I'm still useful to your highness. I can help your highness block marriage and also block peach blossoms." Helian Vivian knew that like these second-generation imperial princes, they definitely didn't like other people negotiating conditions with them. Even if she suggested that it was beneficial to him, he would still be somewhat disgusted. Therefore she had to clearly state all the benefits. Beligaju pulled the corners of his mouth into a smile that wasn't a smile. No matter how you looked at it, it felt somewhat mocking. The more you listen, the better it sounds. Then let's find a time to sign a contract? Helian Vivian glanced at Beligaju with shining eyes. Beligaju's voice lazily asked, "Do we still need to sign a contract?" "Of course. If I regret it in the future and rely on your highness can announce the contract to the world at any time." Helian Vivian wanted to leave a secret for herself. This man was so two-faced. If by any chance something happened, she wouldn't be able to react in time. Beligaju deeply looked at her but didn't say anything. For a moment, Helian Vivian thought that the other party had seen through her thoughts. She kept feeling like her heart had skipped half a beat. She couldn't be blamed for having this kind of reaction. The third prince was too abnormal. It was as if he could see through people's hearts. "All right." Beligaju actually smiled. He slowly raised his thin lips, bringing out an evil charm that no one could see through. "Announcing to the world is not a bad idea." And he agreed so quickly. Helian Vivian kept feeling that something was wrong. Wasn't this matter going a bit too smoothly? Beligaju narrowed his eyes. "What? You want to go back on your word? Don't forget you were the one who proposed to cooperate." "I don't regret it." Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. She just felt that it was too easy. It was a bit unlike the third prince's style. However, she also didn't understand the third prince's style. Maybe it was because he found her more pleasing to the eye today. It's best if that's the case. Beligaju's voice was very light. Helian Vivian shrugged her shoulders. She didn't care. Anyway, based on the current situation, if he agreed, it would be good for her. Not only would she not need to return those few hundred taels of silver, she could also openly return to the academy. There was no need to hide. However, why did you give me the flowers at that time? She had always wanted to ask this question. Could it be that she had offended him in the past? But ever since the general's residence, she clearly hadn't seen him even once. Logically speaking, he should have completely forgotten about her. Why did he suddenly give her the flowers at that time? Chapter 124. What do you think is the reason? Beligaju's fingers stiffened. He looked at her coldly and his tone was as casual as ever. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. She asked because she didn't know. Your brain is either filled with straw or tofu dregs. Beligaju's sarcastic tone had a hint of sexiness. Of course it's because your skin color is more impressive. Otherwise what else could it be? Even men are not as dark as you. Helian Vivian glared. This royal family was too uncute. Didn't she just ask a question? Did he have to attack her personally? After mocking her IQ, he mocked her skin color. Beligaju looked at the small head that hung down. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but raise a touch of demonic coldness. But it's interesting. Interesting. Hee. Helian Vivian's mouth twitched. Did he think he was choosing a mascot? Since the method is proposed by you, you have to abide by it. Baligaju's voice sounded again. I don't like people who don't abide by the rules. After returning to the capital, you have to do your best in the martial chi competition. The old man is still very shrewd. Hellion Vivian smiled softly. Your Highness, don't worry. Since we are going to cooperate as the third princess consort, I certainly won't embarrass you. Don't belittle yourself. Bailey Jiaju said in a low voice. As the two of them were very close to each other, his breath gently hit the back of her ear, causing her to feel limp and numb. Just be yourself. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. And Hellion Vivian slightly raised her eyes. It was just a few simple words, but there was a strange feeling in her heart. Just be yourself. With this sentence, Hellion Vivian decided to try to peacefully coexist with Baligaju in the future. Anyway, she had a backup plan. When there was no other choice, she would use it. Do you understand? Bailey Jiaju lowered his eyes to look at her. His thick eyelashes cast a charming shadow. She raised her eyes to look at him, only to see his firm and resolute thin lips, handsome and domineering. Since you all understand, let's set off now. So soon? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She hadn't received the money yet. No, I still have things to do. Baligaju stopped in his tracks. What is it? Some personal matters. Hellion Vivian wasn't willing to reveal all of her details to Baligaju. It wasn't because she wanted to guard against him, but rather from the very beginning she and Heizei had already discussed it. The matter of them opening a store couldn't be known to anyone. She came to Armament City mainly to meet with Heizei. Even if she wanted to leave, she had to wait until she clearly explained the matter before leaving. Baligaju glanced at her and said faintly, 1 day. I'll only give you 1 day. You also want to stay? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. It's not too safe, right? Baligaju brushed away the non-existent dust on his body. There's nothing unsafe about it. But looking at the little tyrant's attitude, it seems that he and your highness have some grudges. Hellion Vivian said it very tactfully. In fact, she really wanted to say that the way he looked at you was simply as if he couldn't wait to slaughter you. Baligaju grunted. It's a matter of when we were young. I just wanted him to wear a skirt, but he didn't wear it, so I had no choice but to personally put it on him. Hellion Vivian, your highness, can you not speak of such a perverted matter so lightly, hey? Making a man wear a skirt? No wonder when the little tyrant sees you now, he can't wait to chop you to death. Which man would be willing to wear a skirt, hey? What if the little tyrant goes to call for reinforcements? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't think that the little tyrant would be able to take this lying down. Baligaju unhurriedly turned his sleeves and said, I won't give him that chance. Hellion Vivian felt that the third prince was a little irritable today. She wondered how he would deal with the little tyrant later. In short, she would first mourn for the little tyrant. Amitba. In order to quickly finish her business, Hellion Vivian didn't return with Baligaju. However, she wasn't wrong. When Baligaju was facing the beautiful boy, he wasn't that gentle. On the other hand, when the fire Qilin saw that its master had returned, it deeply sighed in relief. The beautiful boy's face was filled with indignation. Imperial brother, if you have the ability, don't let the fire Qilin trap me. Let's fight one-on-one. With you. Baligaju opened his eyes and glanced at him. The beautiful boy immediately straightened his small chest and put on a grandpa. I'm ready to fight at any time. Baligaju coldly continued. Not interested. The beautiful boy's breath was short and he began to clench his teeth. Then let me go. I'm sleepy. Tonight you will sleep here. Baligaju supported his chin, as if he didn't see the beautiful boy's eyes that were filled with anger. The beautiful boy sneered. Are you afraid that I will call for reinforcements? Fine, no matter what, you are still my imperial brother. I will reluctantly let you go this time and sleep here. But don't grind your teeth or snore in the middle of the night. Otherwise I won't be able to sleep. Baligaju frowned. He looked at him as if he was looking at a monster. Who told you that I will let you sleep on my bed? The beautiful boy was momentarily confused. What? Sleep on the floor. After lightly throwing down these 3 words, Baligaju immediately turned around and walked towards the direction of the bed. The beautiful boy looked at that cold and lonely figure and his face wrinkled like a bun. Why did he feel that he was played by his imperial brother? Why? Could it be? The beautiful boy seemed to have figured something out and his eyes suddenly brightened. Imperial brother should care a lot about my partner, right? Beligaju's hand that was unbuttoning his clothes slightly paused, but from the beautiful boy's angle he couldn't see anything. The beautiful boy saw that he didn't respond and prepared to use ruthless medicine. But I heard that my partner doesn't like Imperial brother. In order to refuse Imperial brother's concubine selection, she fled to Armament City. Beligaju still didn't pay attention to him. He reached out and casually threw his clothes on the wooden chair, and unhurriedly picked up the porcelain cup that was placed on the wooden table. The beautiful boy frowned. Could it be that he guessed wrong? Imperial brother didn't have any special feelings towards that Hellion Vivian? Was it purely because Hellion Vivian annoyed him that's why he took her out like just now? The beautiful boy didn't give up. He didn't believe that he couldn't anger him. His bright eyes turned and the beautiful boy continued to speak. I really didn't expect that there would be a day when Imperial brother would be rejected by someone. But thinking about it carefully, it's also reasonable. After all, once a woman has a sweetheart, no matter how perfect a man is standing in front of her, she won't be moved. Imperial brother shouldn't know that between my partner and the Hay family's second young master, there isn't only that little bit of relationship in the academy. It discovered that the man's sparkling handsome side profile had thin lips tightly pressed into a straight line. The fire Chelan was frightened by Beligaju's expression, and its heart trembled. It had followed its master for so many years, and could already roughly judge his mood from Beligaju's expression and actions. When he sneered, it was most likely when his mood wasn't very good. But just now, its master had clearly taught young Master Han a lesson, so how could he still be in a bad mood? Although the fire Chelan had doubts, it didn't ask. It only rubbed its nose and said, "Master, just now young Master Han brought a piece of news. The people from the 4 great clans have already arrived. Should we return to the capital first?" Beligaju didn't make a sound and the room seemed to be even quieter. The fire Chelan lightly swallowed its saliva. It was almost certain now that its master's mood was really very bad. Beligaju's temperament was originally on the cold side, and now there was an additional kind of icy aura on his body that made it difficult for people to approach. It was mixed with a sense of oppression that spread from his eyes, causing the atmosphere in the entire room to become both oppressive and cold. He poured himself a cup of sake and leisurely swirled it. His black hair that was previously wet from the rain was like an incomparably deep night. The more the fire Chelan looked, the more nervous it became, because it had a feeling that its master would crush that cup. Suddenly, Beligaju's thin lips curled and slowly spat out a sentence. "It seems that this lord's prey still has many things that it hasn't told this lord. A disobedient prey needs to be properly taught a lesson." Oh, that wine cup really did shatter in his hand, and the wine instantly evaporated, filling the surroundings with a wine fragrance that made people dizzy. "Master!" The fire Chelan cried out in surprise, "Your hand." Beligaju looked at his cut finger and didn't care at all. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and lightly licked it. A ray of light flashed through his bewitching deep eyes, and a slight breeze blew past, faintly revealing an icy arrogance. The fire Chelan frowned in confusion. Until now, it still didn't understand why its master suddenly became so unhappy. When they had just entered the inn, he was clearly still lukewarm. Could it be because of that woman called Hellion Vivian? It was possible. After all, what its master hated the most was other people touching his things. It wasn't because he liked these things very much, but because he was obsessed with cleanliness. Not to mention prey, even if it was the clothes he normally wore, he would immediately throw them away if they were a bit dirty. He wouldn't have any attachment to them. If that Hellion Vivian was really like what young Master Han said and had some kind of relationship with other men, Master should also immediately lose interest in her. The night outside the window was getting darker and darker. In the inn next to the armament competition venue, Hellion Vivian sat opposite Heizei, and put the white cat on the table. "There's a change in the plan, I need to go back first." Heizei's domineering and handsome eyebrows rose. "You're not afraid that the royal family will catch you?" Hellion Vivian's hand that was drinking tea paused, and she only vaguely made an N sound. She didn't tell Heizei about her agreement with the third prince. Heizei suddenly leaned over, his eyes bewitching. "As long as you have an engagement, the royal family won't make things difficult for you anymore. How about it? Do you want to consider being this young master's wife, N?" Chapter 126. I'm not interested in a playboy. Hellion Vivian lightly rotated the teacup in her hand, each word clear. What's more, if you marry me, wouldn't that childhood sweetheart of yours cry until she fainted in the toilet, The smile on Heise's face instantly became serious. He reached out and drank a mouthful of wine. Her? She's eager for me to get married quickly. The day before yesterday she even sent a pile of scrolls to my grandfather. She really loves to worry. When Heise said this sentence, he carried a faint ridicule as if he didn't put anyone in his eyes. Hellion Vivian actually disagreed. Everyone said that Hei family's second young master's eyes were high, and that his interest in women would never exceed half a month. But in Hellion Vivian's eyes that was because he hid someone in his heart. You can leave first. Heise turned his head, his face clearly defined, his mood flat. You won against young Master Wu Shuang's armament. There's bound to be people who aren't convinced. Staying in Armament City isn't safe. Hellion Vivian thought that this was indeed the case, so she didn't stay any longer. After clearly explaining everything that needed to be explained, she wanted to leave the inn. But she didn't expect to run into Hellion Jiaoer and her group of people. They seemed to have just returned from the armament convention, each of them holding a newly selected armament in their hands. After seeing Hellion Vivian, those people's expressions were all different. Chongfeng, look, that ugly woman also came. She shouldn't have come looking for you, right? Someone laughed out loud. You couldn't blame these people for having this kind of reaction because the previous Hellion Vivian was indeed very infatuated with Murong Chongfeng. Every day she stayed in the Defense Division residence, thinking that she could find out even a little bit of news about her future husband. This was the idea that every young girl waiting to be married would have, but these people took it as a reason to ridicule Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian coldly laughed. With the white cat lying on her shoulder and an umbrella in her hand, she didn't pay attention to that group of people. When Murong Chongfeng heard someone mention her, the light in his eyes couldn't help but look towards her side. Under his long sleeves, his hands also tightly clenched. Perhaps even he himself didn't know why, but these days Hellion Vivian's face kept flashing in his mind from time to time. He thought it was probably because he was not used to it. After all, no one could get used to a person who was so passionate about them in the past being so cold and indifferent now. Look at the umbrella in her hand. Don't tell me it's the one made by young Master Wu Shuang. Jealous gazes fell on Hellion Vivian. Among them, there was no lack of young ladies from aristocratic families who adored Murong Chongfeng. They also had a good relationship with Hellion Jiaoer, so when they saw Hellion Vivian, they were naturally not pleasing to the eye. On top of that, her father also had a certain status in Armament City, so towards Hellion Vivian she wasn't that polite. Hey, we're talking about you. Bring that umbrella of yours over here and let us take a look. However, Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't hear anything, minding her own business as she walked forward. That young lady from an aristocratic family had never been treated like this before. She walked over in large strides and directly blocked Hellion Vivian's path. Her voice was cold. This young lady is talking to you. Did you not hear? Hellion Vivian indifferently glanced at her and only said 2 words. Get out of the way. Ha! That young lady found it funny as she tilted her head. Who do you think you are? You dare to talk to this young lady like this? Just because you were lucky enough to win young Master Wu Shuang's armament, you really think you understand armaments very well? Ugly girl, let me tell you, you're still far from it. Hellion Vivian's eyes looked up and met that young lady's eyes. Her thin lips curved, bringing out a severe iciness. I'll say it again. Get out of the way. That young lady wasn't easy to deal with. Seeing that Hellion Vivian didn't give in to her, her face immediately darkened. Eldest sister. Hellion Jiaoer stood by that young lady's side and used a look that said, how could you be so insensible to look at Hellion Vivian? This is the daughter of the Armament Assembly's vice president, Miss Cheng. Shouldn't you be a bit more respectful to her? Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and a mocking smile slowly overflowed from her eyes. That young lady looked at her appearance and was in a bad mood. She sneered. Forget it. This young lady also won't lower herself to her level. Towards this kind of country bumpkin who hasn't seen many armaments and doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth after occasionally winning one, how much respect do you expect her to have? Little sister Jiaoer, wait until you buy that armament from Profound Heavens. You really should let this country bumpkin see it and let her properly know what is called disparity. After hearing Profound Heavens, the smile at the corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth became even wider. When she raised her eyebrows, it also carried a bit of a unique and unknown flavor. Hellion Jiaoer faintly smiled and hypocritically evaded. It's just that we're still discussing. Whether or not we can get it is still not certain. However, it seems that there should be a plan. Little sister Jiao Air, what are you afraid of? The defense division has plenty of money. Moreover, only a good armament can match your innate talent. Ching Ching patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand and disdainfully swept a glance at Hellion Vivian. Unlike some people who curry favor with others everywhere, but don't have the slightest bit of real talent. I reckon that she hasn't even heard of what profound heavens is. If I were Grandmaster Zizun, accepting a disciple like this wouldn't be enough to lose face for me. Ching Cheng's words caused a burst of laughter from all around. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest, her body leaning against the pillar behind her. How should she tell this Miss Ching that the profound heavens that she spoke of was actually opened by her? Well, let's not waste any more time here. Murong Chong Feng faintly cast a glance at Hellion Vivian. His handsome face didn't have the slightest trace of change. You should also return to where you belong. When Ching Ching heard Murong Chong Feng help Hellion Vivian out of the predicament, there was a burst of discomfort in her heart. Didn't Murong Chong Feng hate this woman the most? What Murong Chong Feng said is right. We completely don't need to waste time on a good-for-nothing. Ching Ching deliberately misinterpreted Murong Chong Feng's words, smiling appropriately. I heard that she will also participate in the martial chi competition not long after. At that time we can actually have a good exchange. She must beat this ugly woman until she can't even crawl up. Hellion Vivian didn't respond to her words. People who were familiar with her should know that she was in a hurry. Otherwise, she wouldn't have endured for so long and would have already sent a fist flying over. However, considering that the third prince was still waiting for her, plus if this matter attracted the attention of the four great clans, it would inevitably cause trouble for the third prince. What she disliked the most was to cause trouble for her own business partners. However, having a good exchange in the martial chi competition actually happened to coincide with her thoughts. Woman, your smile is very evil. Let's not talk about other things first. Could it be that she hadn't even taken the armament master exam? Otherwise, it was impossible that he wouldn't have any impression of this kind of genius, considering that he was the armament judge every year. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of inquiring more about Profound Heaven's boss from Uncle Zhang, but Uncle Zhang's mouth was too tight. It could be seen that Uncle Zhang was born in an aristocratic family's housekeeper. He had a steadiness that ordinary housekeepers didn't have. In addition, there were too many people who wanted to cooperate with Profound Heavens. Uncle Zhang had always been polite to him but not very enthusiastic. If it wasn't for this young girl's appearance, he wouldn't even see any fluctuation of emotion on Uncle Zhang's face. Boss's surname is Chung? Hellion Vivian faintly smiled and raised her good-looking eyebrows. She meaningfully curved her thin lips. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Ching Xiong stuck out his chest. He knew it. It was that Uncle Zhang who didn't understand the rules. At the very least, he was also the vice president that everyone in the armament world knew. Yet he still loved to ignore him. Look at their boss. Her age was a bit young, but she was still quite enthusiastic. However, Uncle Zhang didn't think so. He glanced at Hellion Vivian. Although he hadn't known Big Boss for a long time, he still had a certain understanding of her. He couldn't look at her with the eyes of an ordinary girl. When she truly wanted to discuss business with someone, she absolutely wouldn't smile like this. Her decisiveness in killing and business talk made him, a person who had been in the business world for a long time, endlessly admire her. And her tricks, what were they called? Oh right. Marketing concept. Hungry consumption. Up until now, Uncle Zhang still didn't understand where this phrase came from. However, looking at Big Boss, who started from scratch and caused a sensation in the armament world as soon as she appeared, from ordinary martial artists to martial arts aristocratic families, there wasn't a single person who didn't ask about their armament. He knew that this girl wasn't simple. Therefore, this Ching Xiong seemed to have underestimated his Big Boss a bit. I didn't expect you juniors to have heard of this old man's taboo name. As Ching Xiong spoke, he stroked his own beard. His eyebrows carried a kind of complacency that came from being in a high position for a long time. Hellion Vivian smiled and already pointed out. Vice President Ching did a good job of advertising. Advertising? Ching Xiong puzzledly wrinkled his eyebrows. Why did he feel that he somewhat didn't understand the other's words? Hellion Vivian didn't continue to circle around this issue. Instead she glanced at Uncle Zhang. Uncle Zhang, I have a few matters that I want to discuss with you alone. Yes. Uncle Zhang strolled over. Hellion Vivian lowered her voice. The more she spoke, the wider the smile at the corners of her mouth became. It was as if a demon had found some fun toy when it was bored. Uncle Zhang's gaze on Qing Xiong paused. He respectfully replied. Don't worry, big boss. I know what I should do. Then I'll leave first. Hellion Vivian lightly smiled and nodded in Qing Xiong's direction. Stroking the white cat, she slowly stepped into the long alley. Yuan Ming's deep and shallow laughter was transmitted over. Woman, you're simply too bad. Acting like this, wouldn't that Miss Cheng and that little sister of yours be stifled to death? Huh. Why was he so arrogant? Qing Xiong naturally knew his daughter's personality. He was afraid that she would offend Uncle Zhang, so he quickly reprimanded Qing Qing. Qing, don't be unruly. Qing Qing stretched her neck and wanted to say something. However, she was slowly interrupted by Uncle Zhang. Our profound heavens has always been under the control of my boss. Since Miss Qing is so suspicious of my boss, then there is no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. Vice President Qing, I will take my leave first. Qing Xiong didn't expect that the business that he had been talking about for 3 days would be ruined because of 1 or 2 words. Uncle Zhang, Qing is still young. How could she have offended Uncle Zhang? Uncle Zhang, please speak frankly. You can't just not talk about cooperation because of these trivial matters. Uncle Zhang stopped in his tracks and pretended to be humble as he said with a smile. What are you saying, Vice President Qing? Miss Qing is the daughter of the Qing family and I'm just a servant. There's no such thing as offending her. It's just that my boss is a little strange. She loves money, but she will never cooperate with anyone who has offended her. Offend? Qing Xiong didn't understand and was slightly stunned. When did this old man offend her? He only offended that little girl today. Uncle Zhang didn't speak again. Instead he looked at Qing Qing with a deep meaning and continued to leave. Qing Qing was unhappy and rudely stopped him. I want to see if you dare to leave. Uncle Zhang looked up and smiled. Miss Qing, what are you trying to do? Are you threatening me? She's just the boss of a martial arts firm, yet she's so cocky. Your boss doesn't want to cooperate, right? Then this young lady will properly remove the claws of the dog she's raising and properly beat her. As Qing Qing spoke, she wanted to call someone. Uncle Zhang calmly glanced at Qing Xiong. Vice President Qing, before our boss left, she wanted me to give you a sentence. Cooperation between martial arts firms is voluntary. This is the rule that President Jing of the Armament Guild personally set. No one is allowed to use force to oppress the weak. Especially as a member of the Armament Guild, you can't abuse your authority even more. Otherwise, you will be forever expelled from the world of martial arts. Vice President Qing, as the Vice President of the Armament Guild, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with this rule, right? After he finished speaking, Uncle Zhang couldn't help but admire the words that his boss had instructed him to say before she left. It was simply like hitting the nail on the head, pressuring Qing Xiong so that not only did he not dare to make things difficult for him, he also had to respectfully send him back. As expected, Qing Xiong immediately pulled Qing Qing back. His face was filled with anger. Nonsense. Daddy. When had Qing Qing ever suffered this kind of suffocation, especially in front of the air? This made her lose even the slightest bit of face. She just wanted to say something again to salvage a bit. Yet Qing Xiong heavily grasped her wrist. Shut up, your father has truly spoiled you. As he spoke, he glanced at the servant girl standing to the side. What are you in a daze for? Still not quickly bring the young lady away? That servant girl answered yes in panic and hurriedly went to pull Qing Qing. Mississippi, you let go of me. Qing Cheng's unconvinced voice became more and more distant. This young lady actually wants to ask that one surnamed Zhang. How much ability does that boss of his have to not even pay my father's account? Chapter 129. When Qing Xiong heard this, the fire in his heart burned even more fiercely. Ordinarily he indeed taught his daughter like this. As the vice president of the Armament Association, having a little privilege was natural and proper. However, that was in private. He didn't want her to shout it out in front of so many people. You. Qing Xiong seemed to be really angry. He pointed to the imperial bodyguard at the side and said, "Go tell Miss to go out less in the future. If she says one more word, go to the ancestral hall at the back of the mountain." Not knowing if it was because the imperial bodyguard's words had passed on, Qing Cheng's side finally quieted down. Qing Xiong let out a long sigh. He turned his head and said to Uncle Zhang, "This daughter of mine is really too outspoken. Uncle Zhang, you must not take it to heart. Vice President Qing, I just said that this old servant is only a manager." Uncle Zhang smiled and said, "It's just that our boss still has some words to say to Vice President Qing. It's better to be low-key." The smile at the corner of Qing Xiong's mouth stiffened. He firmly clenched both his hands. This was the first time he was in danger from a little girl whose hair hadn't even fully grown yet. What was even more hateful was that the little girl simply wasn't here. Just by passing on a message he couldn't even move an inch. Speaking of which, why would that little girl have such a big opinion of his own beloved daughter? Could it be that Qinger had really offended her? Qing Xiong didn't understand. However, in just a short half an hour, all of his efforts in these past few days had turned into bubbles. Originally, the Qing family hadn't produced any outstanding armament masters these past few years. On the surface, the Qing family still looked the same as before. In the armament world, they had a pivotal position. In reality, only he himself knew that the current Qing family already couldn't be compared to the previous Qing family. And Profound Heaven's momentum was just right. He looked for Profound Heavens precisely because he wanted to borrow the other party's momentum to shake up the Qing family. If Profound Heavens didn't cooperate with him, the Qing family's road would be very difficult to walk. But to have him lower his head to a little girl, he absolutely wouldn't do it. Uncle Zhang also saw through Qing Xiong's thoughts. Early on, the boss didn't agree to cooperate with the Qing family. It was also because he was talkative. He felt that the Qing family was an old name and had absolute influence in the armament world. That's why he repeatedly proposed to the boss to let her reconsider. Now it seems that not only is Qing Xiong unable to teach his own daughter well, even he himself has that kind of superiority feeling that no one is inferior to him. Such a person would not make much of a difference in the business world. Uncle Zhang took the hat and put it on his head. He didn't say another word to Qing Xiong. Just as he walked out of the inn, someone chased after him. "Uncle Zhang, wait." It was the Hellion Jiaoer. She was much smarter than Qing Cheng. At the very least, she didn't show it on her face even though she looked down on these servants. Her shy smile had a hint of gentleness. Uncle Zhang was a very smart person and had been a retainer of the He family for 2 generations. Although these young ladies in the capital did not know him, he was very familiar with each and every one of them. This was also because the old master had recently made up his mind to marry the second young master. Oh no, he wanted the second young master to marry a wife. He could only say that this Hellion Jiaoer was very good at managing herself. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw him stop, she signaled the maidservant beside her to pass the things in her hands to him. Uncle Zhang didn't need to look at those things to know what they were. He raised his lips and smiled but didn't accept them. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw that he didn't accept the banknotes, she wrinkled her eyebrows. "Miss, what should we do?" That maidservant had never seen someone who didn't accept money. The Hellion Jiaoer secretly scolded that he didn't know how to appreciate kindness. The corner of her mouth hooked up. "Uncle Zhang thinks it's too little?" Miss Jiaoer misunderstood this old servant's meaning. Uncle Zhang raised his head. The light in his eyes was not weak. "Perhaps Miss Hellion Jiaoer doesn't understand our Profound Heavens. Almost everyone in the armaments world knows that we, Profound Heavens, don't accept these." The Hellion Jiaoer squeezed the handkerchief in her hand tightly and said, "I also don't have any other meaning. I just want to buy an armament personally made by your boss. Money can be discussed." Uncle Zhang laughed. "To be able to make our boss personally make an armament, money is one thing but also cultivation. You don't have to worry about this." Before the Hellion Jiaoer could speak, the maidservant standing next to her opened her mouth, arrogantly carrying a thick sense of pride. "My miss is the successor of the Hellion family, a top student at White Academy, a genius that everyone envies. Not to mention these ordinary people, even the armaments aristocratic families in the capital may not be able to win against my miss." Uncle Zhang glanced at that maidservant and suddenly laughed. "I forgot to mention the third point, which is also the point that Profound Heavens just added." "What?" "No matter what you say, my miss can afford it." The maidservant looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face and saw that her eyes were full of praise. The words that came out of her mouth were even more arrogant. Uncle Zhang's voice was steady as he opened his mouth, pausing after each word. Arrogant and egotistical, we profound heavens will not sell anything to her. Hearing this, the maidservant's proud mouth suddenly stiffened, and she couldn't help but look towards the Hellion Jiaoer. Sure enough, the Hellion Jiaoer's face was even uglier than her. That small face that was originally pretending to be friendly at that moment became incomparably ferocious. It was as if she was trying to hold back the billowing waves of anger. What the hell? The Hellion Jiaoer didn't flare up at the moment. After Uncle Zhang left, she fiercely threw out the handkerchief in her hand. Miss, don't be angry. That maidservant hurriedly said. Master has already contacted the person in charge of profound heavens. This steward definitely doesn't know who you are, so he dares to be so rude to you. Wait until we reach the capital. Master will take the armaments back for you. At that time we will let this old thing and that whatever boss take a good look at who they have provoked. The Hellion Jiaoer listened to the maidservant's words and took a deep breath as if relieved a lot. A group of ignorant country bumpkins. Mrs. Right. At the same time, the maidservant nodded fiercely and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately she saved in time. Otherwise, when the Mrs. temper flared up, she wouldn't need to keep her arm. The Hellion Jiaoer tidied up her sleeves. Let's go back and wait until we reach the capital. The people of profound heavens had eyes but failed to see. Sooner or later they would regret it. How could they know that the other party wasn't blind, but simply didn't want to sell the armaments to her at all? After a little servant saw Uncle Zhang, he asked, Uncle Zhang, isn't that the second miss of the general's residence? Uncle Zhang glanced at the little servant. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. The little servant touched the bridge of his nose. I didn't want to ask, I just wanted to ask what she said to you. She looks really beautiful up close. That's still asking. Uncle Zhang's voice was neither slow nor slow. Well, it's about time to go back. Big Boss is also here. She saw Qing Xiong and was not satisfied with the Qing family. The little servant's eyes shook. Big Boss? She's here. Where? Chapter 130. She left a long time ago. Uncle Zhang calculated the abacus in his hand. This time the cost of this trip is not small. Give me all the accounts. The servant's expression was tranquil. I've never seen the Big Boss's appearance. When you first entered profound heaven I already said don't be curious. Uncle Zhang closed the abacus as if he had thought of something, turned his head and said, oh, that's right. Pass down the order, just say that the Big Boss said that in the future if people from the defense division come to buy armaments from us, clearly tell them that they have to pay 10 times the price before we sell them. 10 times. The servant slightly lowered the corners of his eyes. How did the people from the defense division provoke the Big Boss? Not only did they want to earn the other party's money, but they also clearly told the other party. This was simply killing the other party without giving the other party a quick death. After the people from the defense division heard this news, they would certainly be angered to death. Uncle Zhang smiled and shook his head. That's why I said no matter who you offend, don't offend our family's boss. Even if she was in class, she could still make armaments under the teacher's eyes, not to mention dealing with these young masters and young ladies who smell like milk. A person who only used a month's time to make a name for herself in the world of armaments. Merely relying on how many armaments she made was useless, it also depended on her brain. In the end it was these people who looked down on his boss. What's more, his boss also had that kind of identity, the capital's outstanding hedonistic young lady. Everyone wanted to come and step on her foot, so much so that even the people from the Hellion family had removed her name from the family. This kind of person, who could have imagined that she would be profound heaven's boss, the armaments world's most popular armaments master. After he finished speaking, Uncle Zhang entered the carriage. He didn't know that just after he left, the remaining servant's eyes flashed with a trace of light. Accompanied by bursts of light coughing, that servant slowly walked into the deserted long alley. His slender pale fingers streaked across the side of his face. An inconspicuous thin layer of skin lightly separated from that originally somewhat healthy complexion of his face. In the end, only a sickly handsome paleness was left. Young master. The black-clothed man floated down and kneeled on the ground with one knee. His eyes slightly raised with a loyal and devoted expression. In the future, this kind of thing should be left to this subordinate to do, your body. It's fine. That person lightly coughed twice. His long sleeves fluttered with a faint medicinal fragrance. His voice was as gentle as jade, completely different from before. The moonlight shone on his chiseled face. Who else could it be other than the young master of an aristocratic family, Jing Wushuang? No one knew that the reason he came to Armament City this time, other than to find an owner for that female-specific armament, the more important reason was that he wanted to meet the boss of Profound Heavens, who was rumored to be very popular. In the end, that person's whereabouts were even more secretive than his own. He had no choice but to disguise himself as a servant of Profound Heavens to approach him. However, after waiting for 2 whole days in Armament City, he still didn't see that so-called boss. However, at least there was still something to be gained. Although Uncle Zhang acted cautiously, it was inevitable that he would reveal information about that person during the conversation. For example, even if she is in class, she can still do armaments under the teacher's nose. This meant that the person was not an old master like everyone thought. Instead, he was just a student. And in the Dragon War Empire, there was only one academy located in the capital. That was the White Academy that everyone yearned for. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes, covering the bits of broken light emitted from inside. He instructed the person on the ground, "Go tell the people at White Academy that I accepted their invitation." The black-clothed man rarely showed this kind of surprised expression. "Young master, you really want to go to that academy to teach as a teacher?" "Not to teach." Jing Wushuang lightly coughed twice. The smile on the corner of his mouth was still as gentle as jade. "I'm going to be a student." The black-clothed man stared. What? Young master was going to be a student? What kind of joke was this? Even if it was a supreme master's armament, it was not necessarily comparable to young master. If he was going to be a student, who would dare to be his teacher? The black-clothed man had a premonition that in the future, White Academy would no longer have such a peaceful day. Going in like this won't do. I need to disguise myself. Jing Wushuang was very considerate. His fingers supported his forehead and lightly smiled. I don't want to be surrounded by people every day, asking me to help them make armaments. The black-clothed man lowered his eyes. Apart from the Supreme Master, those teachers of White Academy have never seen young master before. You shouldn't be recognized when you go in. There are a few students from White Academy who are participating in the armament meeting this time. Jing Wushuang coughed. His pair of extremely gentle and elegant eyes were like an ink painting. The person who won his armament was one of them. The black-clothed man's eyebrows slightly drooped. Young master, don't worry. I'll greet the 3 students who are present today. Apart from that Hellion Vivian whom master is not familiar with, the other 2 people won't reveal young master's identity. She also won't. Jing Wushuang's tone was indifferent as he withdrew his gaze. The black-clothed man was astonished. How did young master know? She's not that kind of person who likes trouble. Jing Wushuang coughed twice as if he had thought of something. The rare corners of his mouth unexpectedly revealed a faint arc. It was the kind of genuine smile that was different from the one in front of people. The black-clothed man looked somewhat dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? Shouldn't he ask Uncle Liang what had happened these 2 days when he wasn't here? Young master actually spoke up for that famous hedonistic young lady in the capital? This was a bit too strange. Let's go. Jing Wushuang turned around. His sickly handsome appearance made him look like a gentle jade young master in an ancient painting scroll. He was neither anxious nor impatient. Tidy up and prepare to enter the academy in a few days. The black-clothed man lowered his head and appeared very respectful. Yes. However, what else is there? Jing Wushuang saw that he wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked towards the black-clothed man's direction. The black-clothed man lowered his head even more. When this subordinate entered the city, I discovered quite a few experts. They all seem to have come from the capital. They should be the 4 great clans' death warriors. Only, this subordinate doesn't understand why they came to Armament City. Jing Wushuang's fingers paused. He lifted his eyes and looked towards the bright crescent moon. This capital's sky is about to change. Some people can't hold themselves back. Young master's meaning is that their target is the 3rd prince? The black-clothed man was so shocked that his eyelids jumped. However, he knew that the Jing family had always stood on the neutral side and never participated in the matters between them. However, he also couldn't help but say that those old men's guts were really too big. They actually dared to come and assassinate the third prince. However, he also received news that the third prince came out by himself. He didn't bring anyone by his side. No wonder the young master said that the capital's sky was about to change. This time the third prince was afraid that the odds were against him. He grabbed Hellion Vivian and turned around, quickly bringing her to the side to avoid the black-clothed man. However, the fire arrow pierced straight into his arm. "Master!" The fire Qilin, who had hurriedly rushed back, cried out in alarm. It was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were swaying, shaking the entire armament city. Hellion Vivian was even more stunned. Seeing the blood that gushed out and quickly dyed her clothes black, her heart suddenly tightened. She reached out to resist the second wave of attack and kicked that black-clothed man several meters away. "There's poison on the arrow." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and looked at that black blood. The light in her eyes changed. "It's the cultivation scattering powder." The cultivation scattering powder was an extremely vicious poison. Especially for martial artists, it would rob a person of all their martial chi. According to reason, this kind of poison should not appear in the Dragon War Empire, because it had been clearly banned. However, unexpectedly there were still people who used it. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's arm that was almost a foot away. Hundreds of thoughts ran through her mind thousands of times. Those black-clothed men madly rushed over. Even though they feared the sudden appearance of the fire Qilin, they also knew that once their master was injured, no matter how fierce the mythological beast was, it would be unable to resonate with their master. Not only that, as long as the third prince used his martial chi again, his martial chi value would rapidly decline. Once it reached the critical point, they didn't need to do anything. The third prince would be bitten back by the mythological beast contract, and his meridians would be broken. This was also the reason why these black-clothed men were unbridled and relentlessly pursued. Beligaju tightly grasped the sword in his hand. His long and narrow eyes deepened. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian paused. Her fingers also tightened. She knew that as long as Beligaju used his martial chi, the poison would quickly spread. The poison in his body would quickly enter his body. When that time came, he was afraid that she absolutely couldn't let him lose all his martial chi because of her. Hellion Vivian's always indifferent and lazy eyes suddenly became piercingly cold and sharp. "Yuan Ming." She used her consciousness to summon her own familiar. Her eyes slightly flashed like a demon. "I command you as your master to kill them all." Yuan Ming licked his thin lips. "Then what about their souls?" "To be nourishment for you." As soon as Hellion Vivian's voice fell, her long hair slightly moved. The surrounding air seemed to have some changes, little by little spreading in all directions. The black-clothed men were all stunned. They couldn't take another step forward. Their eyes couldn't open because of the strong wind, so they could only stretch out their hands to block. Then at this moment Hellion Vivian grabbed Beligaju's arm. She must immediately think of a way. If she had the tools at hand, she could also do a small operation for him. She had too many disguised identities, so holding a scalpel was not a big deal for her. But now not only did she not have any tools, those black-clothed people had not left, and they would find them in a short time. However, this kind of poison could not be delayed. If it was delayed, the third prince may be crippled. Hellion Vivian tasted what it was like to be a waste in the Dragon War Empire. This body reminded her almost every day because she did not know martial chi. She was humiliated. Bailey Jiaju had already lost his martial chi once because of the fire in the past. Hellion Vivian knew that it was easy for people to go from low to high, and from high to low no one would know the pain in her heart. Not to mention a cold perfectionist like Beligaju. In the end, if it were not for her, he would definitely be able to avoid that arrow. Hellion Vivian looked up. His pair of beautiful eyes had lost their usual indifference and coldness. There was no reflection in them. Under her hand was a man's skin that was not hot like before. Hellion Vivian was shocked by the heat coming from his body. He had a fever and the temperature was shockingly high. "You have a fever, when did this happen?" She wanted to know if the change in his body temperature was related to the cultivation dissipation powder. Bailey Jiaju looked deeply at her, who was almost a foot away from him. The two of them were very close to each other. Because she wanted to avoid being searched by the men in black, she simply sat in his arms and was more obedient than ever. However, Fever? No matter what, Bailey Jiaju was always cold and indifferent. Am I having a fever? Hellion Vivian heard this and was almost speechless. Did he not even know when he had a fever? How about this? I'll ask in a different way. When did you feel a headache? Hellion Vivian watched the man press his long eyebrows with his slender fingers. While rolling up his long sleeves, he sorted out his thoughts. Baligaju looked at her expressionlessly. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched twice. Don't tell me you don't even know when you have a headache. I know. His Highness gave her 2 words very casually. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She could finally communicate. When was that? The day you ran away. His Highness did not even change his tone of voice. His elegance had a self-proclaimed coldness. Hellion Vivian. At this time the third prince was still in the mood to choke her. Was he trying to make her feel even more guilty? Oh. The third prince should not have that kind of character. Hellion Vivian restrained her emotions. So, you have been burning for 3 days and 2 nights. How could there be such a person? The world was right, the third prince was not a person, he was a god. I don't know. Baligaju turned his face to the side, his motionless expression showed indifference, letting the wound ooze blood. That's it. It seems that the situation is not so bad, at least the cultivation dissipation powder's poison is not so deep. Hellion Weiwei's eyes turned and her line of sight fell on Bailey Jiaju's hand. She didn't think too much about it. Instead, she fiercely exhaled and then quickly bent down. Chapter 134. Baligaju's fingers paused. His cold thin lips parted as he looked at Hellion Vivian, who had placed her thin lips on his arm to help him absorb the poison. Suddenly, his eyes congealed and he directly pushed the person to the side. He forcefully pressed down on her wrist, his voice indifferent. Do you know what kind of poison this is? Even if you indiscriminately suck it in. Cultivation scattering powder, bah. Hellion Vivian spat out a mouthful of black blood that she had just sucked out. She carelessly met his eyes. It's only a little less martial chi. When the time comes I'll just cultivate again. Hey, I say, Your Highness, can't you just be an obedient blind person? His eyes couldn't see, yet his strength was still so great. Sure enough, he wasn't human. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She was prepared to wait for an opportunity to continue sucking out the poisoned blood for him. Baligaju directly used his left hand to press against her head. This Highness sees that you don't want to live anymore. Yes. Wait until you have the strength to kill my 9 generations. Hellion Vivian leaned over while her mouth vaguely said, it's best to kill all of those people from the Hellion family. That would also save her from wasting her own strength. Baligaju's eyes seemed to slightly flash as he looked at the hairy little head in front of him. In the depths of his eyes, there seemed to be a faint trace of gentleness. Don't look at how this woman was normally vicious and merciless. When she was well behaved, she actually looked quite pleasing to the eye. But it's about time. Hellion Vivian continuously sucked in a few mouthfuls of black blood, spitting it out on the ground. She looked at the wound. However, this is only temporary. We must find a place as soon as possible to help you clean up the remaining poison. After she finished speaking, she again continuously spat out 2 mouthfuls of black blood. Her lips were somewhat numb and she felt some martial chi drain. However, it couldn't be considered much. Just like she said, when the time came it would be fine to cultivate again. On the contrary, Yuan Ming evilly laughed. Woman, you're really generous to this third prince. It can't be that you've fallen in love with him, right? Hellion Vivian chuckled and replied silently, you always say that I have feelings for you. Until now, do I have feelings for you? Maybe it's because you feel that I don't like you that you decided to take a step back and choose the third prince. Yuan Ming's narcissism was directly proportional to his age. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Wake up, will you? No matter how bad your eyes are, they all know that you're the second best. Even if the third prince was an evildoer, he was still a perfect evildoer. The others were indeed no match for him. Hellion Vivian's gaze then fell on Baligaju's side profile. He wondered what this evildoer looked like. It was said that the fire had disfigured the third prince. That was why the third prince wore a silver mask all year round. Except for a very small number of people, no one could see his true face. In the past, Hellion Vivian had believed this rumor. But now, Hellion Vivian felt that with this evildoer's style, his face shouldn't have been disfigured. It was very possible that this was a smokescreen deliberately released by the man. It was said that curiosity could kill the cat. The more Hellion Vivian looked at the man in front of her, the more her heart itched. Because the two of them were in an especially close position. The tip of her nose was filled with the man's pleasant smell of sandalwood. It faintly lingered in the surroundings as if it could cover a person in a small world. No matter how chaotic the situation outside was, no matter how dangerous it was, it wouldn't reveal the slightest trace on his body. But she saw him standing there, unhurriedly using his fingers to brush off the dust that wasn't on his body. His voice was as indifferent as before. No need. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju pulled her back with a pair of indifferent eyes. His voice carried a trace of evil that had never been there before. We can also compete with them in terms of numbers. Just as the man's voice fell, Hellion Vivian saw that not far away, countless warhorses were galloping from the distance. Those people were all wearing black riding clothes. Their faces were black and their hands were holding swords. They were like a black wind that swept over. Everywhere they went there was blood. However, the man just stood in this bloody scene without even blinking. He didn't even care about the slightest bit of dust. He was always so clean and cold like a high and mighty god. But Hellion Vivian knew that he was never a soft-hearted god. He was a demon. Chapter 135. It's the Shadow Guards. Why would they appear here? Didn't they say that the third prince didn't bring a single person? The men in black looked at each other in dismay. Clearly they were caught off guard by this sudden situation. They looked at the cavalrymen who were flanking them from both sides and dropped the swords in their hands. They wanted to seize the opportunity to escape. But how could Beligaju allow this to happen? He stood at the entrance of the wind and looked down at this scene from a high vantage point. He calmly and unhurriedly took out a white handkerchief and wiped away the bloodstains on Wei Wei's fingers. His thin lips slightly curved. Kill. It was only one word, but Hellion Vivian could feel an unprecedented sense of oppression. The black mass of cavalrymen swept past, bringing along the sound of martial chi with them. This was the legendary Ghost Palace, killing 3,000 crows, not leaving a single one alive. Hellion Vivian almost suspected that the third prince was doing this on purpose. He was deliberately waiting for the black-clothed people to come out before he mobilized the cavalry to surround and kill them. Just as she was thinking this, Hellion Vivian felt a weight on her shoulder. The man who was originally standing there suddenly leaned on her shoulder. Hellion Vivian moved her hands and propped him up. She didn't care about the shadow guards who were leading the cavalry and wanted to drag the third prince away from here first. Beligaju tried his best to hold on to his last bit of willpower. His voice was extremely cold. Tell them to leave one alive for this highness. Kill the rest without mercy. Hellion Vivian listened to the man's cold voice and raised her eyebrows. She once again sighed at the abnormal physical strength of a certain highness. At this time the fire Qilin also came over. Because the owner's weakness would be returned to the divine beast 10 times, the fire Qilin's condition didn't look very good. But this didn't affect its ability to bite those black-clothed people who tried to get close to Hellion Vivian and the others. Basically crushed them to death with one claw. However, it didn't continue to fight. In its heart, only the safety of its master was the most important. How is master? Such a huge divine beast suddenly opened its mouth to speak. Hellion Vivian felt that the originally unstable road was trembling even more. She glanced at it and said, "Bend down." The fire Qilin had never been ordered by anyone other than its master, so it was somewhat stunned. Wei Wei immediately pressed down on its big head. After that she dragged Bailey Jiaju up. After that she nimbly flipped over, her voice neither soft nor soft. Third prince needs treatment. First go find a quieter place. It's best if there's hot water and a bed. The fire Qilin took a deep look at Hellion Vivian. It had seen many different types of women, but it had never seen one as calm as Hellion Vivian. The fire Qilin didn't say anything else and displayed its divine beast nature. It spread out its 4 limbs and its large wings spread out from both sides. It was tall and sturdy like the warhorse of the Grim Reaper in comics. When the fire Qilin flew there would be a strong wind. Hellion Vivian could only grab onto its red fur, but she only had one thought in her heart. If there was a chance in the future she would definitely tell the winged beast that had once carried her, that their boss' beautiful fur wasn't soft at all. Moreover, when it flew it was a bit too irritable. The people sitting on its back couldn't even open their eyes because of its flashing wings. It was also because of the fire Qilin that Hellion Vivian and the others quickly found a suitable place to treat their injuries. Hellion Vivian didn't forget what Beligaju had just instructed her. She turned her head towards the fire Qilin and said, "Go tell those shadows, leave one alive for investigation, kill the rest without mercy." This was the second time this woman had ordered it. The fire Qilin calmly moved its claws, its voice without the slightest ripple. "Those things, young Master Han can do them all. The most important thing now is to heal Master." "Young Master Han?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Little tyrant?" She really imagined the appearance of a beautiful youth brandishing a sword and playing with a spear. However, since the fire Qilin had said so, it meant that the youth wasn't as simple as he looked on the surface. Hellion Vivian gathered her thoughts and put them on Beligaju's wound. Even the skin there had turned black, and the surrounding muscles had begun to show signs of stiffness. The poison that she had just suppressed by sucking blood had begun to spread again. The cultivation scattering powder's poison wasn't easy to detoxify, and they wouldn't be able to find the antidote in a short time. Even if the third prince had ordered to leave one alive, that person didn't seem to have the antidote on him. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and decided to do it herself. The third prince has been poisoned by the cultivation scattering powder. Ordinary medicine simply can't treat it. You go prepare a bucket of hot water, a jar of new hong, a few pieces of white cloth as well as a needle and thread bag. I'll need them in a while. Hellion Vivian ordered the fire Qilin with a clear mind. She didn't forget to take out a pill from her bosom and put it into Beligaju's mouth. This time the fire Qilin didn't care about the taste of her orders. It quickly transformed into its human form, and prepared all the things that Hellion Vivian wanted it to prepare. Hellion Vivian took the things and skillfully pulled up her long sleeves, rolling them up a few times, exposing her snow-white wrists. She reached out to tear all the clothes on Beligaju's body to shreds. She didn't expect that the royal's sense of defense was more powerful than she had imagined. Just as her fingers were about to touch his chest, he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with an unusual light, as if he was going to tear her apart with his own hands if she were to get any closer. His eyes were filled with a thick evil aura. When he saw that the person in front of him was her, those deep eyes gradually recovered their calm. His voice was hoarse and low. "What are you doing?" "I'm giving you a small operation." Hellion Vivian didn't mind his vigilance. He was the same. She would never let anyone get close to her, especially when she was injured. She would be more aggressive than usual because she needed to protect herself. Like the third prince who was finally chased from time to time, and was betrayed by his personal maid, it was estimated that he would be even more like this. So Hellion Vivian raised her hands and let him see the silver knife and needle in her hands. Then she continued, "You were unconscious just now." Chapter 136. Hellion Vivian had always thought that the third prince's figure would be very good, but she didn't expect it to be so good to the point that it was pleasing to the eye. She suddenly felt that he should find a chance to go to the fragrant garden or something. He would definitely be able to sell for a good price. Saliva. The man's cold voice rang in her ears. If that kind of self-centered sitting posture were to be taken out, the group of noble ladies in the capital would definitely faint again. However, the third prince always liked to have a poisonous tongue, which was not desirable for her. Let him have his poisonous tongue. Later she would charge him more surgery fee. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's mouth curved into a smile. She reached out and took out the needle and thread, then smoked it under the oil lamp. Her movements were very professional, so fast that it made people dazzled. After the silver needle was done, Hellion Vivian wiped the man's body temperature. It was actually higher than before. She didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing that he could still stay awake with a fever like this. If the other party was unconscious, she could use the knife on his body without any scruples. But he was awake, so she had to carefully serve him. She couldn't take the opportunity to see what he looked like. Hellion Vivian felt uncomfortable and secretly decided to double the surgery fee. "Drink the newer hong, it can stop the pain." Hellion Vivian swept away the indifference and leisurely from before. She tied up the scattered hair again and carefully fixed the strands that were scattered around his ears. Her whole body emitted a cautious and evil aura. "Lie down. Lie down." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. A pair of long and narrow eyes stopped at the bayonet in Hellion Vivian's hand. Hellion Vivian met his gaze and thin lips curved. You can also sit down, but it will hurt more when you use the knife. Beligaju faintly hummed but didn't do anything. Hellion Vivian understood his meaning and didn't say anything more. She directly took the wine and drank a mouthful but didn't swallow it. Instead she sprayed it all on Beligaju's wound. Following that she picked up the silver knife and ruthlessly cut along the lines of his muscles. Bailey Jiaju's thin lips tightened as his line of sight moved upwards. A delicate and pretty little face was reflected in his clear peach blossom eyes. Being stared at by the man like this, Hellion Vivian didn't panic at all. She dug out the arrowhead and began to clean the wound with cold wine. After cleaning it, she picked up a needle and stitched up Beligaju's wound. When Beligaju saw this, a faint light flashed in his cold eyes. He had seen countless famous doctors, but he had never seen such a treatment method. Was there such a treatment method in the Divine Land? Beligaju's eyes darkened as he asked casually, "What do you think of possession?" Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but her hands remained calm as she continued, "I haven't studied it. Could it be that this man had discovered something?" Hellion Vivian's eyes tightened. In the Divine Land, the most forbidden thing was possession. The so-called possession was a change of soul from the original body. It was basically the same as her current situation. The possessor would be burned in a raging fire for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't want to be treated as some kind of demon. That's why she hid everything and didn't even disclose her identity as the owner of Profound Heavens. Although that would bring her a lot of convenience, at the same time, there would be people watching her. Hellion Guangyao wasn't stupid. Even Hellion Jiaoer had a bit of brain. It was impossible for a person to change so much in one night. She had to take it slow and let them think that other than her change in temperament, everything else was obtained by luck. Beligaju watched this scene and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. The next morning, the wind was gentle and the birds were chirping. Hellion Vivian opened her eyes and saw a golden ray of sunlight shining in, causing her to slightly squint her eyes. Just as she was about to get up and move around, she found that she seemed to be pressing down on something hard. She slightly raised her eyes to look and saw that she was pressing down on the third prince. Chapter 137. Beligaju's masked face glowed with a faint silver light under the sunlight. He was so handsome that it was somewhat dazzling. Only his temperament was too calm. He was so indifferent and cold that it made people feel like it was blasphemy to get close to him. Hellion Vivian stared at the man in front of her. Because of the sudden change in scene, she was a bit confused. Her body also stiffened and she stopped moving. However, while she was lost in thought, Beligaju's cold voice suddenly sounded and instantly pulled her back to reality. "If you want to look at this king, then sit properly. This king is uncomfortable with you pressing down on me like this." Every word was like a gem and there was no trace of sleepiness. "Or, are you saying that you just want to throw yourself into my arms?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her eyes moved down and she gave a cool smile. "With your highness' current state, you don't have the qualifications to criticize me." Beligaju kept his hands behind his head. His lazy appearance made it seem like the one who had a reaction wasn't him at all. He was simply an evildoer among evildoers. Hellion Vivian couldn't compare to the other's face. She pulled back her hands and planned to get up. Beligaju's eyes were half closed as he looked at the woman in front of him. His expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied with losing a pillow. This king still hasn't slept enough. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. What did he mean, this king still hasn't slept enough? What did it have to do with her whether he slept enough or not? Moreover, his posture clearly showed that he wasn't hugging a person but a pet. How did she look like a pet? Hellion Vivian was just about to use violence to subdue the third prince when she heard a slightly hoarse and deep voice with a unique coldness. "In the future, don't snore when you sleep." Hellion Vivian stared at him. How did she snore when she slept? Aside from personal attacks, what else could this third prince do? Isn't it tiring to live in the clouds all day long? What's the point of caring about so many details? Hellion Vivian looked at the man who was close to her and secretly cursed. Even his sleeping posture was so perfect that it was abnormal. He didn't feel tired at all. She had been sleepy for a long time. Anyway, there weren't any extra beds here. After helping His Highness's fever for an entire night, her eyes were a little tired. Hellion Wei Wei adjusted her position and moved closer to the bed to take a nap. But why were the three sovereigns lying down as well? Hellion Vivian thought that a clean freak like him would get up as soon as he woke up, just like last time in Spirit Forest. Looking at the current situation, he did not intend to look for another room. There was a man lying beside her in such an unbridled manner, and the surrounding was filled with the distinct scent of dragon yen sandalwood, with a unique cold aura. Hellion Vivian's line of sight couldn't help but stop at the side of his face with the mask on. The high bridge of his nose, the thin corners of his lips, and the cold lines always gave people the illusion that their hearts would stop beating. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian felt her eyelids become heavy. She simply yawned and went back to sleep. Beligaju still maintained his original position as he lay to the side. Looking at the sleeping Hellion Vivian, his ink-black eyes gradually sank. The sleeping Hellion Wei Wei appeared to be very quiet. What didn't change was still that roguish aura. He didn't know where she learned it from. Her slender and thick eyelashes covered her eyelids, fluttering like a butterfly's wings. Her nose was small and delicate. The black ink on her face was a little smudged. She looked like a stupid fox that fell into the ink. However, Beligaju knew that this fox would only settle down when she was sleeping. Usually, Beligaju's eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's left hand that was placed on his waist. He reached out and pinched Hellion Vivian's palm. Just like what Hellion Vivian said, that action didn't seem like he was pinching a person, but more like he was pinching a pet. Therefore, even now, the third prince was still considering whether or not to directly cripple this pair of scratching claws. Disobedient little thing. Bailey Jiaju's eyes darkened again as he looked at her slightly cold side profile. He pulled the quilt over and pulled Hellion Wei Wei into his embrace along with the quilt. He also planned to sleep for a while. "Your Highness," Shadow tentatively called inside. In reality, he had already stayed outside for a long time, but he was afraid to disturb his master's rest. What made him surprised was that His Highness could actually tolerate someone else sleeping in the same bed as him. One had to know that His Highness's obsession with cleanliness had reached a certain level. That year, when His Highness tamed the fire Chilin's beast form, His Highness raised it by his side and they lived together for half a month. After that, no one was able to spend the night by His Highness' side. Could it be that His Highness really intended to raise Miss Hellion as a pet? Or could it be that it was because of other reasons? While Shadow was thinking, Beligaju already stood up. He was still wearing yesterday's ancient long robe, the collar was half open. With a whoosh, he pulled open the wooden door, revealing the abs that would make people jealous. The long robe on the wooden table seemed to be blown up by the wind and steadily fell on the man's shoulder. The long black robe hung straight down, showing off the perfect white skin. It brought a strong visual impact and filled the air with a familiar feeling of asceticism. The wound on his arm not only didn't make him look battered, it instead added a different kind of evil to him than usual. Shadow looked at him like this and his entire person was stunned. Combined with the conversation just now and what Miss Hellion did to His Highness. His Highness, he couldn't have been raped by Miss Hellion, right? No, it definitely couldn't be. He must be thinking too much. Shadow shook his head. Beligaju, wearing a mink fur black robe, had a languid expression as he reclined on the wooden chair at the side. His fingers took off the silver mask and the bright light shone on his face. One could faintly see the man's incomparably handsome side profile, as if he was the world's most perfect jade sculpture, making people unable to move their line of sight away. "How is it?" Bailey Jiaju extended a hand and picked up the celadone cup on the table. The joints of his hands were clearly defined, contrasting with the delicate porcelain cup. Even the space between his fingers was suffused with a pure and cold radiance like white jade. It was that kind of scholarly thin hand, but it made people feel as if it could hold the entire universe in its palm. Chapter 138. When Hellion Vivian woke up again, it was already noon. The third prince was sitting by the window drinking tea. He looked unhurried, as if he was waiting for her to wake up so that he could hurry on with his journey. He had a high fever for several days, but he recovered in just one night. Hellion Vivian had never seen a person with such a strong recovery ability. However, she also didn't care. Lying on the bed and stretching, she looked at Bailey Jiaju and slowly smiled, carrying a clear and cold shrewdness. "Since His Highness is well, then let's talk about the matter of the consultation fee." Beligaju didn't say anything. He only raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He lazily leaned against the wooden chair with his legs slightly crossed. His aura was cold and luxurious. He didn't look like he was injured at all. Hellion Vivian took out a small abacus from her space and started to calculate. 1 mouthful of poisonous blood is worth 10 taels. I drank about 7 mouthfuls, so a small operation is worth at least 80 taels. In addition to the night of fever rubbing, I'll give you 100 taels. The rest of the expenses are also 10 taels, so that's a total of 180 taels. Calculating to this point, she frowned. 180 taels? Why does it feel like something is wrong? Alright, I also fed your highness a pill. I'll charge you 20 taels to round it up. After speaking without waiting for the man to respond, a pair of slender white hands reached over. The total is 200 taels. Your highness can pay the bill. Bailey Jiaju looked at the lush and delicate fingers in front of his eyes. His extremely deep and dark eyes looked up. The rays of light refracted by the sunlight seemed to fall into his pair of slender peach blossom eyes, bright and moving. 200 taels? This woman really dared to open her mouth like a lion. He raised his eyelids and looked at the pure silver abacus in Hellion Vivian's hand. His voice was faint. Are you short of money? When Hellion Vivian heard this, she felt that there was hope for the money. She nodded and smiled. Baligaju leisurely put down the teacup in his hand. The silver that I won from you seems to be more than 200 taels. Is your highness planning to reconcile the accounts? Hellion Vivian looked at him with clear eyes. That's a separate matter. Baligaju looked at her. After a long while, his thin lips slightly hooked. You really don't know or pretend not to know. What? Hellion Vivian felt that the third prince's appearance was an insult to her intelligence. Baligaju's eyes were clear and cold. In the Dragon War Empire after marriage, the property is managed by the wife. Hellion Vivian's outstretched hand paused for a moment. Did the royal mean that she would be in charge of the money in the future? It had to be said that sometimes the royal family who were indifferent to fame and fortune also had their cute side. Hellion Vivian took the abacus again. She paused, raised her head and asked, It is said that the Ghost Palace has a lot of rare treasures, is that true? Baligaju indifferently responded. There was no change in the expression on his face. Hellion Vivian calculated the abacus. Also, I heard that when you were young, the retired emperor gave you a lot of tungsten and told you to play with it as you pleased? Baligaju nodded. It was just a simple action of drinking tea, but it could be seen that he had a good upbringing. Hellion Vivian was angry in her heart. This was the difference between them. They were both trash. The royal family played with armaments parts like toys. She didn't even know what armaments were. She even foolishly chased after Murong Chongfeng to play with them. Thinking carefully, did she count as marrying a tall, rich and handsome man and walking to the peak of life? Although it was only a contract marriage. Everything was fake. Hellion Vivian, then let's do it like this first. When we think of something, we'll add it. Hellion Vivian deliberately looked at the clause of husband and wife's obligation. There was the word no written at the end. She was relieved. She took the red rouge and pressed her fingerprint. Then with a faint smile she pushed the paper away to Baligaju. The man half raised his eyebrows and looked at Hellion Vivian. When she lowered her head, she would always reveal a piece of skin behind her neck. It was very white, very tender and very easy to bite. Thinking of this, Baligaju's gaze was somewhat unable to move away. This place had been repeatedly lingered on last night. Every part of her was dyed with charm and a ruffian aura. When her black phoenix eyes looked at people, there was always a faint stubbornness. It turned out that a woman could also have such an impressive appearance. Especially those thin lips that were stained with water, appearing somewhat moist, imperceptibly revealing a sense of seduction. Baligaju lowered his eyes with a slight depth. Hellion Vivian was eating sweetly when she saw the third prince, who was reading a book, looking at her. Is it very delicious? It was that kind of clear and noble voice that was commanding to the bone. Hellion Vivian thought that the third prince's question was definitely a foreshadowing. What he was going to say next was that a pig like her would find anything delicious to eat. She wouldn't be fooled by him. Therefore Hellion Vivian was very smart and didn't answer. But what she didn't expect was that the third prince's next action was to hold the scroll in one hand, while the other hand reached out to hold her wrist. Then he took the remaining half of the osmanthus cake in her hand and sent it into his indifferent thin lips. Hellion Vivian saw this scene and slightly stiffened her body. Why did she feel that the third prince's action was somewhat intimate? Moreover, for him to eat something that she had already eaten. It felt strange. But the third prince still had the appearance of an aloof male god that didn't eat the food of mortals. This made Hellion Vivian unable to pull her hand back for a while. In the past, when she was doing missions in the wild, it wasn't like there wasn't anyone who would take a bite of the compressed biscuits. Perhaps she was just thinking too much. Hellion Vivian was preparing herself mentally when the carriage will seem to have hit something heavy, suddenly swaying. She was holding a teacup in one hand, while the other hand was held by the man. For a moment she couldn't stabilize her body, but she couldn't reach out to the left side to stabilize her center of gravity, because the royal family was sitting there. She subconsciously wanted to avoid the man, but she didn't expect that he would be one step faster than her and press her entire body into his embrace. A light and elegant man's fragrance immediately filled her mouth and nose, like a lotus flower or snow. It was the same as the smell that occasionally came out of the carriage, quiet and cold. "What's the matter?" His voice was very light, without any emotion. The person outside the window respectfully replied, "Reporting to your highness, we don't know who put a stone on the mountain road, but it's not a big matter." Beligaju lowered his eyes and lowered his head to look at her. His beautiful peach blossom eyes slid past her eyes and fell on her messy neck. His deep eyes slightly deepened. His hand was placed on her waist that she couldn't help but hold. The temperature of his palm passed through her clothes, warming her body inch by inch. What she didn't expect was that when she went in, her deskmate was also there. He quietly stood in the deepest part of the study. He wore a pure white long robe with a slim green robe. His posture was as straight as a knife, and his face couldn't be seen clearly from afar. This made Hellion Vivian feel that his appearance was very familiar. He seemed to be saying something to the principal. Hellion Vivian didn't hear very clearly, but when she looked in this direction, that pair of long and narrow eyes were incomparably dark and silent, appearing particularly unfathomable. Since when did her deskmate become like this? Hellion Vivian wanted to look more carefully, but she saw him turn around. With one hand in his windbreaker, he looked like an aristocrat who had walked out of a manga. That pair of eyes were as elegant and bewitching as usual. The corner of his mouth hung an arc of a smile that wasn't a smile. He looked down at her in a lonely and bewitching manner. He demonically smiled at her. "My great patron has finally returned." Hellion Vivian silently rubbed her aching temples. This man's words still made people think of elegant things. "Why are you also here?" "Something came up at home, so I went back for a few days." Beligaju's voice was natural, as if this topic wasn't something important. On the contrary, little Baldy, who was eating a meat bun at the side after hearing his words, his movements paused. His small face that was like a steamed bun stiffly wrinkled up. Although he was already used to third brother's pretentiousness, seeing it still affected his appetite. The little seventh prince began to consider whether or not he should go into seclusion and wait until third brother recovered his identity before coming out. Otherwise it would be very tiring. He had to pay attention to what he said and couldn't get too close to third brother. It was all because those people from the superior compound were always thinking of making trouble for third brother. They even set their sights on this time's academy entrance examination, wanting to take advantage of the opportunity to bully third brother. When little Baldy thought of this, he slightly raised his head, held a meat bun, and began to observe a moment of silence for those people. Tisu Feng didn't stop his previous questioning because of Hellion Vivian's entrance. He warmly curved his thin lips, and his finger pushed up the frame of his glasses that had slid down. He said, "The inferior compound wants 3 people to participate in the academy entrance examination. You 2 recommend 1 more person to the superior compound." Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. If she didn't remember incorrectly, she only came to cancel her leave. What was this academy entrance examination thing? This is White Academy's rule. There will be an academy entrance examination every year. Chapter 142. Beligaju looked at him, his thin lips overflowing with evil. "I won't. Who told me to not pay my tuition fees yet?" Of course I have to think of a way to earn more money. Cough. Little bald head immediately choked. Holding the meat bun, he stared with round eyes. Even someone as gentle as Tusu Feng couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he heard this answer. Wasn't this stinking brat too much of a pretense? Hellion Vivian didn't care what was going on with the strange atmosphere in the study. She could find someone to practice with, and she could also earn some vacation time. There simply wasn't a better deal than this. I agree. Hellion Vivian had always been efficient in doing things. However, I don't have anyone to recommend here. Apart from sleeping in class, she was usually only close to her desk mate. She didn't even recognize the rest of the people. I do. Beligage's eyes were bewitching, his voice indifferent. Just play casually. Just bring a lie along. Little bald head played with all his might, his mouth stuffed with meat bun. He didn't say anything. According to his understanding of his third brother. Just play casually. He was referring to crushing one side to death. What's more, he was bringing along Nangong Lai, that great demon king. These two people together. In any case, this time he absolutely did not want to represent the superior compound in the competition. Reality proved that little seventh prince was thinking too much. Although the newly appointed elder of the superior compound wasn't as obvious as Jing Wu Wang, in his heart he still firmly believed that to deal with those trash from the inferior compound, they simply didn't need an elite like the seventh prince. Even Murong Chong Feng and Hellion Jiaoer were used as backup support. As long as there was one expert in the starting lineup, it was enough. There was no need to waste too much time on the people from the inferior compound. On the contrary, he had always wanted to poach the He family's young master from the fine compound, so he had no choice but to pay more attention. As for the rest, he and the other students could casually eliminate them all. Hellion Jiaoer's thoughts were the same as the superior compounds. For a martial artist like her to fight with those trash from the inferior compound was simply lowering her own standards. However, what she didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian was actually on the list. Shouldn't that bitch be expelled as soon as she returned to the academy? Could it be that Hellion Mei didn't do a good job? Hellion Jiaoer's eyes darkened. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that other than being arrogant in front of others, her younger sister had no brains at all. She couldn't even do such a simple thing. Hellion Mei didn't know how she had offended the Hellion Jiaoer. Whenever she saw her, the other party had a cold attitude towards her. Hellion Mei was not a good-tempered person. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand and said in an irritable tone, "Second sister, what's wrong with you? Why are you throwing a tantrum as soon as you come back?" Throw a tantrum? Hellion Jiaoer laughed coldly. "Third sister, if father hears what you just said, you won't be able to study anymore. Why don't you take a look at where you are and speak so unruly?" Although Hellion Mei was angry in her heart, she couldn't help but admit that her father had already warned her countless times. If she made another mistake, she might really be expelled from White Academy. When that time came, she could only marry an average-looking master or even worse. She didn't want to taste that kind of feeling. "Second sister, I'm just anxious." Hellion Mei muttered and softened her tone. "I'm afraid I've offended second sister." Hellion Jiaoer knew her younger sister's weakness better than anyone else. She held the teacup and drank a mouthful of tea before slowly saying, "We're all sisters, what's there to offend? I'm saying this for your own good. Right now your martial chi is average and you haven't had any big breakthroughs in a few years. That's pretty much it. If you don't pass the etiquette, how would your future husband be willing to marry you in the future?" What second sister says is right. Hellion Mei agreed with her mouth, but she wasn't happy in her heart. She wasn't a child anymore and had her own concept of honor and disgrace. Every word that Hellion Jiaoer said about her was practically poking at her heart. If Hellion Jiaoer's attitude was a little better, then it would have been fine. That kind of mocking tone made Hellion Mei unable to feel happy when she heard it, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to offend her biological sister. "It's good that you understand." Hellion Jiaoer saw that she had tamed her and began to talk about proper business. "The rumors that I asked you to spread, did you spread them?" Hellion Mei nodded her head. "I did everything according to what second sister said. It's also that little slut's luck is good. Grandmaster Zizun personally helped her apply for leave. He said that she didn't elope with some man, but rather went to Armament City. It seems that she's planning to take the Armament Master exam." Speaking to this point, Hellion Mei coldly humphed in disdain. Someone like her wants to take the Armament Master exam? She's simply looking for humiliation. It would have been fine if Hellion May didn't mention the matter of Armament City. Once she did, the poisonous intent in Hellion Jiaoer's eyes became even stronger. The handkerchief that she was clenching was also tightly clenched into a ball. Hellion May observed Hellion Jiaoer's expression. Not knowing what had happened, she was somewhat at a loss. What was going on now? Relying on good luck alone, she won't be able to go far. Hellion Jiaoer took a deep breath and put down the handkerchief in her hand. Does she think that she can rely on those methods of currying favor with others to play some fancy tricks? Ridiculous. Hellion May actually agreed with this point. Second sister, you're right. I heard that the soldiers dispatched by the third prince have already withdrawn. It's clear that he's lost interest in that slut. The third prince has never been interested in her. Hellion Jiaoer's voice was cold. It's just that he couldn't get used to her way of doing things and wanted to teach her a lesson. Now that he thinks it's troublesome, he withdrew the soldiers. However, this was also good. She didn't have to worry all day long that His Highness would really see that slut in a different light. Hellion May didn't expose Hellion Jiaoer's thoughts and only echoed, "It's still second sister who understands the third prince." However, 2 days ago, there was a rumor in the academy that a fairy had appeared in the capital. In the capital, we've all seen those big families' young ladies. How could there be such a person? Chapter 143. There's one thing you still don't know. Hellion Jiaoer didn't beat around the bush on the topic of armaments. She was afraid that if she said too much, her envious little sister would feel uncomfortable in her heart. She simply divulged Hellion Vivian's information. Hellion Vivian obtained the qualifications to enter the inferior compounds competition. As expected, Hellion May's face stiffened. How is that possible? According to the Academy's regulations, each compound could only send 3 people to enter the competition. Even she, because of her poor performance last time, was eliminated by the fine compound's headmaster. How could that slut be so lucky? Hellion Jiaoer drank a mouthful of tea. This isn't anything strange. The students of the inferior compound are all at the Earth stage. Whether or not they pass the 3rd stage is another matter. She's also in the inferior compound. If it was another compound, she might even be at the end of the line. Hellion May thought about it and also thought so. She turned her eyes and said, I heard that these 3 people each represent different subjects. I don't know which subject that slut will choose. No matter which subject she chooses, she won't pass. I reckon that she won't even have to fight with your fine compound before the inferior compound is eliminated. Hellion Jiaoer wasn't worried at all. She put down the teacup in her hand and laughed disdainfully. What's more, even if that slut wins, the other 2 people in her group won't necessarily pass. The competition rules are 3 rounds, 2 wins out of 3. Hellion May also laughed. Second sister's right. The trash in the inferior compound won't be able to make any waves. It's actually a pity for that young master. Speaking to this point, a devilish smile appeared in front of Hellion May's eyes. Her eyes drooped and her face heated up, dyed with a crimson red. Hellion Jiaoer wrinkled her eyebrows. That young master? He majored in divination from the inferior compound. The more Hellion May spoke, the more bashful her expression became. He's different from those trash. Aside from being born in poverty, he's not inferior to anyone else. During the test, he even got 1st place. Hellion Jiaoer didn't believe it. How could such a person be in the inferior compound? Moreover, divination was not a subject that anyone could learn. Unless one was extremely talented, no one would choose to learn divination. It's probably because his family doesn't have any power. Hellion May sighed. Speaking of this, she felt vexed. Young Master Lai was good at everything except for this. She had ordered people to inquire about him, but they could not find anything. It could be seen that this place was too remote and he did not have any reputation here at all. Perhaps he was the son of a concubine of some county magistrate. He wanted to be successful, so he put in a lot of effort to enter the White Academy. He was just like that young master who often stayed together with that slut Hellion Vivian. It really made her feel like she had no appetite for food, but it was a pity to throw him away. In the end, Hellion Jiaoer understood this younger sister of hers. She fretfully reminded her, forget about those who don't have power. Father won't let you marry over there. I know. Hellion May clenched her hands. Suddenly, she raised an eyebrow as if she thought of something. Second sister, if you want me to say, that slut likes to make mischief so much. It would be better to let father directly let her marry someone who can let her live in peace. Wouldn't that be better? Hellion Jiaoer coldly snorted. Do you think father doesn't want to? But don't forget, the blood flowing in her body is the true Hellion blood. If she marries poorly, there will definitely be people who make irresponsible remarks. Second sister, what are you afraid of? How is the current her like the true Hellion blood? Hellion May's pair of eyes shone. Even the elders don't recognize her. Who would still treat her as a descendant? She's just a good-for-nothing. Father giving her a marriage is thinking highly of her. Hearing this, the Hellion Jiaoer's mouth followed with a smile. Why didn't I think of this? You're right. The current her simply doesn't have the qualifications to be a descendant. In a moment, I'll write a letter to father and let him quickly get rid of this slut so we don't have to worry about her. Second sister still has a way. Hellion May bore a grudge against Hellion Vivian in her heart. If it weren't for that slut, she wouldn't have fallen to this state. No matter what she did, she had to look at other people's faces. It was completely different from when she was in the Defense Division's residence. Even when she married, it wasn't her who chose others, it was others who chose her. She must let that slut have a taste of what it was like to not have a choice. It would be best if father arranged for her to marry an old man and let her marry him as a concubine. After Hellion May and Hellion Jiaoer finished chatting, her entire body felt much more comfortable. Even those students from the inferior compound who were usually unpleasant to the eye didn't seem so shabby today. When they met at the commerce courtyard, she even chatted with those people for a while. Those who came from the border cities were petty. Their intentions to curry favor with her were very obvious, and they didn't even know how to conceal it. At the same time that Hellion May disdained them, she also enjoyed this kind of feeling. As she walked, she waved the fan in her hand. I heard that the contestants from your courtyard have come out. Who are they? The young girls who were chatting and laughing in front immediately quieted down. Following that, they curled their thin lips. There's only one girl, Hellion Vivian. I don't know why the principal chose that trash. In terms of martial ability, she's not even as strong as little sister Hongya. Little sister Hongya, why don't you say something? The one who was called little sister Hongya lazily raised her head. Her sleepy eyes were blurry, but compared to the other young girls, she had a bit more heroism. What's there to say? Since the principal chose her, then it proves that she's better than me. But with your ability, you obviously can enter the fine compound. If it wasn't for young Master He not wanting to be in the same courtyard as you would also. The young girl spoke until here and suddenly realized that she said something wrong. She quickly covered her mouth and laughed awkwardly. Little sister Hongya, I didn't mean it that way. Nalan Hongya glanced at her and stretched her waist. It doesn't matter. In any case, what you said is the truth. I'll leave first. In a while, there'll be self-study for martial arts. You guys can continue chatting. Why is she so unsociable? Hellion May looked at the young girl's departing figure and shook her head. She didn't say anything else. After all, Nalan Hongya's identity was there. Not only was she from a prestigious family, she was also friends with the He family since childhood. However, what did you guys just say? That bitch, no, I mean my big sister, she chose martial arts? The young girls grunted in agreement. Today, during the armaments class, she was still asleep. The teacher woke her up, but she said she didn't know anything and made her stand outside for the entire class. This kind of person actually chose armaments. Do you think that our inferior compound hasn't lost enough face? After hearing what was said, Hellion May wrinkled her eyebrows. After the last time when she and Hellion Vivian had a duel, she thought that bitch would choose martial chi. She didn't expect that she would actually choose martial arts. Did she know how to assemble and disassemble martial arts? I heard that after those two young masters finished choosing, there was only martial arts left. That's why the principal arranged for that trash to choose martial arts. In any case, she'll lose no matter what she competes in. When the seventh prince was young, how did the retired emperor teach him? How did he teach him to be like this? Looking at the third prince, although it made people feel cold from the bottom of their hearts, at least he wasn't that bloodthirsty. But they were all wrong. No one knew that the person who took care of the little Baldy when he was young was not the retired emperor, but Baligaju. It could be said that the seventh prince became like this because his brother told him one sentence when he was young. Go fight. If you can't handle it, I'll help you fight. Apart from eating, the little Baldy only remembered one thing. He had his brother behind him to support him. Therefore, it was understandable that the seventh prince was raised to be a little tiger. Okay then. The little Baldy was injured. He took out a meat bun and comforted himself. I'll wait for third brother at the superior compound. Bailey Jiaju caressed the little one's head again and instructed in a low voice, Shadow. Your subordinate is here. Shadow knelt on the ground with one knee. When he appeared, there was no sound. Baligaju's eyes were indifferent. In the future, follow the seventh prince. Whatever he wants to eat, go get it for him. The seventh prince seems to be banned from eating meat. Shadow changed his words to remind his master about White Academy's rules. Baligaju raised his eyebrows, and then? Shadow thought, and then master, shouldn't you be more or less apprehensive? Baligaju continued speaking, his voice without any ripples. He's not here to be a monk. Let him eat. Shadow lowered his eyes, yes. Sigh, rules and whatnot in his highness' eyes were nothing. Little seventh prince was actually very happy. Pulling Shadow, he rushed towards the Commerce Courtyard store. Bailey Jiaju was the only one left under the shadow of the huge tree. He casually walked forward, his ink-like black hair fluttering in the wind. His outer robe was not tied with a belt, so it was draped loosely on his body. His eyelids were half closed, showing countless flirtatious thoughts. However, his facial features were indeed aesthetically pure and noble. Two kinds of extreme beauty were vividly expressed on his body. When he passed through the Commerce Courtyard streets, there would always be girls who couldn't help but look in his direction. Using Hellion Vivian's words, if White Academy had a ranking of handsome men, this deskmate of hers would absolutely be the number one of the number one, steadily becoming the Academy's most handsome man. Young master. The servant standing next to Yuan Lingxian stepped aside in Baligaju's direction. Yuan Lingxian didn't care at all as he coldly humphed. The other aristocratic young masters actually curved their lips into a smile. I heard that he's in the inferior compound's list of competitors this time. He's only a clown from the inferior compound. No matter how decent he looks, he still can't compare to Yuan Gu. That's right, how can he compare to Yuan Gu? But this brat is too arrogant. Don't tell me he doesn't know this is our territory. Yuan Gu, should we go teach that brat a lesson? Someone looked towards Yuan Lingxian's direction. Yuan Lingxian raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. However, one could see that his expression was somewhat displeased. Another person pulled the person who spoke back. Your brain is muddled. Do we need Yuan Gu to personally deal with that kind of person? In a moment we'll find a place where there's no one and tidy up that brat. Right, look at me, I'm really muddled. That person slapped his forehead, his eyes shining. We're going now. What kind of situation was this? However, his confusion only lasted for a second because in the next second, a figure swept over and kicked him in the face. Without giving him the slightest chance to speak, that woman grabbed his collar and gave him 2 punches in a row. She even twisted his wrist and sneered. Is his face something you can hit as you please? Ooh. How could he dare to hit his own face? That was clearly the man who had grabbed his hand and swung it at himself. He was also very astonished. What kind of person would hit themselves, bastard? Hellion Vivian frowned. What are you talking about? He probably feels wronged. Baligaju stretched out his hand and rubbed the side of his face that was beaten. His long eyebrows seemed to be furrowed because of the pain. Coupled with his long and thick eyelashes, it was easy to feel sorry for him. When Hellion Vivian saw this, she gave that man 2 more punches. You still dare to say that you are wronged? How could you do that to such a beautiful face? Woo. He was really wronged. How could he know that there was such a good actor in this world? This was the first time he beat someone up and beat himself up. What was going on? Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her mouth. What? You still don't accept it? The 4 of you beat up one person, what's there to cry about? That man shouted himself hoarse. You don't understand at all. No one can understand the pain in my heart. Let him go. Baligaju's cold voice sounded from behind. It's not good to make a scene in the academy. The other 4 young masters. You're still afraid of making a scene. If you were fucking afraid of making a scene, you wouldn't have dislocated our arms. You're letting them go so easily? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Aren't you too kind when you do things? Woo. The man in Hellion Vivian's hand was irritated again. Please, miss, take a good look. How is this man kind? Although he didn't make us bleed, it doesn't mean that he didn't want to kill us. He said it himself when he was beating us up because he didn't like how dirty the blood was. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. You seem to have something to tell me? That man was about to nod when he saw the man's gaze land on him. It was as deep as the night and as cold as ice. Gulp. He swallowed hard and shook his head. No, I don't want to say anything. Beligaju retracted his gaze and said indifferently, since he doesn't want to say anything, let him go. I'm not used to this kind of fighting scene. When the four young masters heard his words, they had goosebumps all over their bodies. They had seen liars before, but they had never seen someone who could lie so casually. Not used to it? Who the fuck was it that sent them flying with a single kick just now? He even crushed their elbows. If this woman hadn't appeared, they would have been in a worse state. Is that so? Hellion Vivian walked in front of the four young masters in confusion. She didn't know that the man standing behind her had a cold look in his eyes at that moment. It was full of warning. The four young masters shuddered at the same time. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Is it that scary? Although she was a little tanned, she wasn't hopelessly ugly. Why did the four of them look like they had seen a ghost? Chapter 146. You're not the scary one, it's the king of hell behind you. The four pampered sons didn't dare to say anything and hugged each other tightly. They only had one thought in their minds right now. Who could take away that seemingly indifferent and harmless, yet when it came to fighting he would take away their lives. The key was that they couldn't even figure out his tricks. After beating someone up, he still had an expression that said, someone bullied me, come and protect me. What was going on? They were the ones being beaten up, okay. Don't you think that they're a little weird? Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and looked back at Beligaju. Beligaju brushed the non-existent dust off his body and frowned. Weird. The group of people's expressions changed as they shouted, no. We don't blame you. Hellion Vivian curled her lips in amusement. How can you answer your own question like that? The young masters wanted to cry but had no tears. They didn't want to, but look at the man standing next to you. His gaze was so cold, as if he would take their lives if they said one wrong word. All right. Beligaju rubbed his forehead as if he couldn't bear the pain on his cheek. Let them go back. Hellion Wei Wei grunted and casually threw the person in her hand away. She looked at those fleeing silhouettes, then looked at Bailey Jiaju's slightly flushed face. It hurts a lot. A little. Beligaju calmly replied, I can't handle 4 people by myself. Hearing this, the young masters in the distance slipped heavily. Liar. This person is lying again. He clearly beat them up to the point that even their parents couldn't recognize them, but he's still pretending. I need to apply something to reduce the swelling. Hellion Wei Wei lifted that face with her finger and looked left and right. She did not have the slightest bit of bashfulness of an ordinary girl. She slightly frowned and said, How did you hit him with such strength? I always feel that the point of contribution is a little strange. Beligage's eyes flashed. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but he blocked her hand. With a devilish look in his eyes, he said in a casual tone, What? Is your heart aching? Hellion Wei Wei smiled and flirted back. No matter what, you're still under my protection. Go. Let's deal with your injuries first, then we'll talk about what happened today. Beligaju nodded faintly. When Hellion Vivian turned around, he took the white handkerchief he used to wipe his hands and threw it into the trash. His face was cold and aloof, which was unfamiliar to Hellion Vivian. That was the real him. Legend had it that he had lived in seclusion for 10 years and would not step out of the Ninefold Palace unless it was absolutely necessary. He would only appear occasionally in some conversations of the royal. Fortunately, White Academy had a specialized doctor who could treat people. That doctor had probably never seen a new student with such outstanding looks like Beligaju. His aged hands were shaking. Hellion Vivian leaned against the wooden medicine cabinet and casually flipped through the herbs. She looked at the man's handsome face that gradually sank. She took the iodine from the doctor's hand and dipped it in a white handkerchief. She pinched the corner of the handkerchief and gently applied it to Beligaju's face. The sun shone on her body and her whole body was covered with a golden halo. If this action was done by other girls, it would inevitably carry a trace of ambiguity. But Hellion Vivian didn't have this kind of feeling. He kept the distance just right, not too close and not too far. Especially her eyes, there was a special laziness in her smile, as if she was doing something very ordinary. It's done. Hellion Vivian took back the handkerchief. Baligaju didn't stop her. He was obviously used to being served by others. But that pair of dark eyes slightly raised when Hellion Vivian took back her hand. Nangong Lai put his arm on Baligaju's shoulder with an evil smile. This hero, how does it feel to be saved by a beauty? Did those people just tell you? Baligaju leisurely glanced at him. That gaze was extremely cold. Nangong Lai's scalp went numb and he subconsciously nodded. Before he could react, he heard the man's unique voice. How do you feel about using your body to get information from a woman? If I had known earlier, I would have insisted on being the third person. That way he wouldn't even need to go on stage. When facing the superior compound, the competition system will change. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. It's designated by the compound. Divination is placed in the third position, which is the complete opposite of the previous position. However, we need to win against the good compound and the fine compound to be able to face the superior compound. Then it really will be a rather long competition. Nangong Lai reached out and twirled his long hair. His phoenix eyes slightly raised, carrying a different kind of pondering. Baligaju picked up the porcelain cup in front of him. Indifferent and otherworldly, his posture was graceful, and he had a strong aura of self-restraint. Not necessarily. Not necessarily? You feel that we can't win? Nangong Lai frowned. That shouldn't be the case. Although everyone said that the Hellion family's young miss was a good-for-nothing, based on his observations during this period of time, she wasn't that simple. Bailey Jiaju tidied up his sleeves. The light in his eyes was cold as he glanced at Nangong Lai. Not necessarily for a very long time. Nangong Lai was stunned. Only now did he react. He misunderstood the other's meaning. You're saying that we can definitely face the superior compound, and that we won't need that much time to deal with the good compound and the fine compound? After Nangong Lai silently confirmed it, he leisurely added another sentence. You're saying this, but have you considered the thoughts of those people from the good compound and the fine compound? Your Highness, you're only a student from the inferior compound. Even if the truth is like this, you still can't be so arrogant. However, I like this proposal. Nangong Lai smiled unrestrainedly and said to Hellion Vivian, then it's settled. The first two matches will be a quick and decisive battle. Hellion Vivian sat with her legs slightly crossed. Her face didn't change much. From beginning to end, her thin lips carried a light smile that made people feel comfortable. The proposal isn't bad. However, the good compound and the fine compound aren't as easy as you think. At the very least, when you charge into the fine compound, there's the He family's young master blocking. It won't be easy. He family's young master. Nangong Lai first glanced at Baligaju, then turned his head meaningfully. He faced Hellion Vivian and said, it seems that you have a very high opinion of him. Hellion Vivian didn't even raise her head as she looked at the scroll of paper. She replied, he really does make people pay attention to him. I feel that he's even more powerful than some people from the superior compound. Oh, so that's how it is. Nangong Lai dragged out his tone. His eyes looked towards Baligaju's direction. Baligaju's face didn't change in the slightest. Only, his hand that was hidden under his long sleeves was slightly sluggish. Even the cup of water in his hand rippled with layers of water. Chapter 148. You've been injured by someone? Nangong Lai seemed to have heard some strange news of the world. His entire person stood up and looked at Baligaju with a thick sense of disbelief. When had the Ghost Palace's third prince ever been beaten? Even if he lost his martial chi. No one dared to chirp in front of him. Not because of anything else, but because this person's methods were too ruthless. So ruthless that even those people from the 4 great clans didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. Moreover, he still held grudges. He didn't like to deal with people at the moment, but he would slowly make up for it later. Those shadow guards who tried to assassinate him were an example. Don't look at how unhurried he was in Armament City. After he came back, he went to the palace once. Just that one trip made everyone from the 4 great clans and 8 great sects panic. He didn't say who sent those shadow guards. He just said that among these people he brought up the evidence, making those people dumbstruck and speechless. They could only look on helplessly as he investigated them one by one. Every time he investigated a family, there would always be some other matter exposed. The clan leaders of the 4 great clans had no choice but to spend more money to take care of this. What they wanted was face, and they were from a prestigious family. If some things were known by the people of the capital, they would inevitably become the common people's after-dinner joke. That was simply more unbearable than letting them suffer a beating. Now they didn't even dare to go to the brothel, afraid that Third Prince would be unhappy and directly send people to block them in bed. Don't say that the cold and aloof Third Prince wouldn't do this kind of thing. So far there were already 2 elders who had been investigated by him like this. They were investigated until they had a psychological shadow. Now they couldn't get hard in front of anyone. Thinking about it carefully, originally when they were happily doing that thing, it was the moment when the men were most enjoying and most unguarded. But at this time, a knife suddenly appeared above their heads, and there were also countless shadow guards standing in the air. They didn't touch a single hair on their bodies, only gazing at them with lingering gazes. But as long as he thought of that scene, Nangong Lai's hair stood on end. That's why he believed that this kind of man would be beaten. Even if you beat him to death, he still felt that it was impossible. There must be some conspiracy. Based on his understanding of Aju, the other party must have some conspiracy. Nangong Lai looked at his good friend's calm appearance and was about to speak. He was interrupted by Baligaju's voice. There were 4 of them against me. Is it strange that I was injured? Of course. Nangong Lai originally wanted to say that it was too strange, but after seeing his gaze, his Adam's apple couldn't help but move. He forcibly changed his tone. It's not strange, fuck, what the hell is going on? Back in the day, this man used to stick to beat back more than 100 big men. After the beating, he even said not to look for him for such things in the future, and that it was a waste of his sleeping time. Now that there were only 4 of them, they couldn't beat him? Who would believe such words? What's more, he had already recovered his martial chi. That was because he was too lazy to expand his martial chi shield. Otherwise, as long as he moved his fingers, those people would instantly lie flat on the ground. What was he pretending to be? He even injured himself. From Nangong Lai's point of view, no matter how he thought about it, that so-called injury was deliberate. When Hellion Vivian went to get something midway, he couldn't bear it anymore and asked his good friend sitting beside him in a low voice. The injury on your face shouldn't have been caused by you, right? In order to use the trick of injuring himself in front of Miss Hellion and disguising himself, it was too much like something this two-faced man would do. It wasn't. Baligaju put down the porcelain cup in his hand and leaned back, indescribably languid and apathetic. The fist was someone else's. Nangong Lai deserved to be called someone who had stayed in front of Third Prince for a long time. With one sentence he understood the other party's meaning. The corner of his mouth slightly twitched a few times. Okay, from a certain point of view he indeed didn't hit himself. He only pressed someone else's hand and touched his face. Those people shouldn't have exposed your matter, right? Nangong Lai smiled. After fighting with you, they'll definitely feel that they had eyes but couldn't see. However, relatively speaking, your disguise also can't be concealed for much longer. When the time comes, you'll also have to go to the superior compound. Relying on the inferior compound's conditions, you won't be able to withstand those shadow guards who continuously want to assassinate you. Baligaju only curved his thin lips, demonically cold to the bone. They won't dare. It's not that they won't, it's that they won't dare. It seems that Aju must have given the other party an unforgettable lesson. Sigh, pitiful little young masters, obviously there were 2 of them. Of all the people they could have picked, they just had to pick Aju. Picking Aju wasn't as good as picking him. At the very least, his methods were still relatively gentle and wouldn't leave a shadow. He reckoned that right now those little young masters were hugging each other and crying bitterly. Nangong Lai's guess wasn't wrong. Those 4 pampered young masters really were in so much pain that tears came out, but they still didn't dare to tell Yuan Lingxian the truth. They were afraid that Yuan Lingxian would think they were too useless and disdain to use them again. They also couldn't tell the truth. If they told Yuan Lingxian that the new student from the inferior compound was very strong enough to be on par with you, they reckon that not only would young Master Yuan not feel happy about their honesty, he'd even give each of them a kick, kicking them all out. Moreover, even now they still couldn't forget that man's gaze. That kind of demonically cold from hell. Just experiencing it once was enough. They really didn't want to provoke that king of hell again. Therefore, when young Master Yuan summoned them, the majority of what they said was false. Originally, the four of us could have knocked him down. We don't know why, but Hellion Vivian went later. We were afraid that if the matter got out of hand and the dean found out, it wouldn't have a good effect on young Master Yuan, so we hastily wrapped things up and returned. Yuan Lingxian coldly swept his eyes over the injuries on their faces. These were all done by him alone? Yes. The four of them looked at each other. Some were done by Hellion Vivian. Yuan Lingxian wrinkled his thick eyebrows. That debauchee's recent actions are actually a bit unexpected. However, based on her strength, only you people from the good compound will lose. Young Master Yuan is right. When the four of them hung their heads, the muscles on their arms began to ache dully. Aside from being afraid of that man, there was also resentment hidden in their hearts. Young Master Yuan, you must make them suffer a bit during the competition. They even dared to move against us. They clearly don't put young Master Yuan in their eyes. Yuan Lingxian wasn't the type of person who'd only rely on a few words to fan the flames of trouble to make his anger soar to the heavens. However, he himself found the people from the inferior compound unpleasing to the eye. Even his face carried ridicule and disdain. If they want to fight with this young master, they'll have to be able to face off against the people from the superior compound. Speaking up to here, he turned his head and sneered. They're only a few clowns. Do you think they have that ability? Chapter 149. In the past, after Yuan Lingxian said this kind of thing, he would always hear a wave of seconding or praising. But today those four were exceptionally silent. This made Yuan Lingxian couldn't help but look at them strangely. What, do you think this young master said something wrong? Those four people stared blankly at first, then shook their heads with all their might, squeezing out a stiff smile. No, how could what young Master Yuan said be wrong? Hey, if there's nothing else, you can go back. Yuan Lingxian saw that these four people didn't even have their usual quick-wittedness, and immediately felt that there was no meaning. The little manservant standing by his side also knew how to look at things. Once he heard his master say this, he hurriedly led them out. When he returned, he had a smile on his face. Young master, this little one has inquired. The good compound has a strong man. Although his martial chi isn't good, he's very hard to deal with. With him there, he'll definitely be able to teach that arrogant brat a lesson. Tell that strong man to hit his face. If he does well, this young master will naturally give him some benefits. Yuan Lingxian was originally a proud and arrogant person, and was also a well-known figure in his family. Even in the capital, there weren't many people who dared to provoke him. Murong Chongfeng and Heizei were fine. After all, no matter whether it was strength or family background, they were all people who were on par with him. It was this poor brat who popped out of nowhere who stole the limelight as soon as he entered the compound. Of course, Yuan Lingxian wasn't like that Zhang family's young master who didn't have a brain at all. When he saw this kind of person, his first reaction wasn't to teach him a lesson, but to use him for himself. He hated that he, the grand young master of the Yuan family, was actually disregarded by a poor brat. He only threw him one sentence: not interested. How could Yuan Lingxian swallow this anger? As Yuan Lingxian's personal manservant, he naturally knew about this matter, and also understood his master's thoughts. His voice became even more respectful. Young master, rest assured. Everything will be handled by this little one. Those three people are all top-notch trash. If they're not sleeping in class, they're taking long-term leave. If it wasn't for the inferior compound not being able to select people, the principal probably wouldn't have sent them to compete. This kind of combination won't even win one of the 3 matches, let alone the superior compound. Achoo. Hellion Vivian, who was helping Huan Mingxiang sweep the floor in a corner of the commerce courtyard, sneezed heavily. She looked at the old man who was leisurely drinking tea behind her and raised her eyebrows. Elder Huan, I've already helped you with your work. The salary the academy gave you, shouldn't you give it all to me? Cough. Originally, Huan Mingxiang, who had been humming a little tune to steal half a day of leisure, didn't drink a mouthful of hot tea. He almost choked himself. Where would this old man have any employment fee? Helian Wei Wei propped the broom on the ground and laid on it lazily. She propped up her chin with her fingers and looked at him with amusement. A dignified elder of 3 generations sweeping the floor here and you don't get paid? Who would believe that? Little girl, you haven't dealt with that brat Tusu before. Don't be fooled by his appearance. He's got a lot of black water in his heart. Huan Mingxiang angrily put down the teacup in his hand. If you ask this old man, that nephew of his learned from him. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nephew? It's that icy brat who wears a mask all day and pretends to be mature. Helian Vivian finally understood. The royal family had definitely offended Elder Huan in some way, which was why every word he said was related to his profession. When she heard it before, she didn't feel anything, but now that she was preparing for a contract marriage with that man, when she heard it again, she felt strange in her heart. Right, I heard that you want to represent your inferior compound in the competition. Huan Mingxiang stroked his beard and laughed. This is also good. It's time to let them see your strength. It'll also let you make a name for yourself before the martial qi competition. Helian Vivian rubbed the bridge of her nose and lightly laughed. My competition isn't martial qi. Not martial qi? Huan Mingxiang was dumbstruck. Is it because that brat Tusu didn't choose you? In a moment this old man will go find him and have a talk. How could that brat listen to rumors? Truly hateful. Helian Vivian's tone was indifferent. It wasn't decided by the principal. It was each of the 3 of us who chose it. He didn't care. Even if it was divination, which she didn't know anything about, she still had Yuan Ming and Xiao Bai to help her in the Xuanhuan space. It was just that if it was martial cultivation or martial qi, her chances of winning were higher. Now that she thought about it, the 3 of them seemed to be a bit too casual. Just like that, you choose one, I choose one, and the competition was set. The main thing was that the principal was too indulgent. He said that as long as they agreed to compete, they could do whatever they wanted. To tell the truth, this was the first time Helian Vivian had met such an open-minded principal. You guys chose it yourselves? The more Huan Mingxiang listened, the more unreliable he became. Then who chose martial qi? Helian Vivian bent down and swept the floor, her ankles revealing heavy buckles that were hard to detect. She indifferently replied, my desk mate. You have a desk mate? Huan Mingxiang exposed a shocked expression. Haven't you always been a loner? The corner of Helian Vivian's mouth twitched. Everyone who goes to class has a desk mate, okay? Hearing this answer, Huan Mingxiang still felt dissatisfied. If it was you who chose martial qi, you guys would definitely win. This old man dares to tell you that aside from that little baldy from the superior compound, there are very few people in this white academy who can beat you. Little baldy. Helian Vivian's fingers paused. Her eyebrows lightly smiled. 7th prince is so powerful? Huan Mingxiang humphed twice. Isn't it that icy brat who taught him? A perfectly good little milk baby was raised like a little tiger by him. Last time the little tiger even delivered meat buns to this old man. Early in the morning, it stood outside and called me with all its might. It was so noisy that this old man couldn't even sleep. Seems that Elder Huan really likes 7th prince. Helian Vivian and the old man had been in contact for a period of time. Chapter 150. What our team values is freedom of expression. Helian Vivian thought for a long time before finally saying a satisfactory answer. After all, she still wanted to win. Huan Mingxiang was once again dumbstruck. Freedom of expression? In other words, they hadn't even gotten used to each other yet they planned to face those students from the good compound tomorrow? Can you guys really win? The old man helplessly held his forehead. It wasn't that he didn't believe in this girl, but he didn't know the details of the other 2. Helian Vivian answered with confidence this time. We must win. So confident? The old man laughed loudly. Normally this girl was always low-key. This time she said these words. He reckoned that she had some tricks up her sleeve. Helian Vivian beamed as she nodded. Our team is different from others. What's different? Huan Mingxiang's curiosity was piqued. Helian Vivian rubbed her chin and deeply curved her thin lips. Our goal is relatively clear. Look at money and earn a lot. This time the dean is very generous. The winner will receive 100,000 taels. Huan Mingxiang's mouth twitched. This was the difference between their team and other teams, she said. It really was different. He had been at White Academy for so many years, but this was the first time someone participated for the prize money. Forget it, forget it. Huan Mingxiang laughed and sighed. Bring your desk mate over. Although this old man is old, I can still give him a few pointers. This old man can't help with divination, but here is an ancient book. You can keep it. Hellion Vivian thought about it and also felt that this was safer. After all, after the good compound they would face the fine compound. They had to pay attention to Heize's strength. Letting Elder Huan give pointers always had its benefits. I'll bring him over in the evening. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. He's still here. Huan Mingxiang nodded and stroked his beard. What attribute is that desk mate of yours? What level is he now? Never asked. Hellion Vivian guessed. He should be Earth rank. Huan Mingxiang's fingers, which were stroking his beard, suddenly froze. His eyes widened slightly. Earth rank, the lowest level? What the hell was there to compete for? He would definitely lose. Probably. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, the light in her eyes slightly brightening. Wait until evening when I bring him here. Elder Huan can talk to him alone. Huan Mingxiang thought for a moment, then said, that's all we can do. An Earth-ranked martial artist, he had to think carefully. How many years had it been since he last saw an Earth-ranked martial artist? One couldn't blame Huan Mingxiang for having such a reaction. One had to know that as a third-generation elder of the War Dragon Empire, aside from his influence within the imperial court, he also had great attainments in martial qi cultivation. As the leader of the battle spirit forces, he could be considered a master that everyone admired. Just as he had said, he had not come into contact with an Earth-ranked martial artist since more than 10 years ago. I still have to think about how to teach him. Elder Huan, do you really plan on teaching them? After Hellion Vivian left, a cyan silhouette appeared behind Huan Mingxiang. Won't it be too much of a waste of time? Those students from the inferior compound, aside from this Miss Hellion, the other people's aptitudes aren't that great. That's why last time you proposed to select people from the inferior compound, that's why it wasn't accepted. For someone like you, it's enough for people to throw away 1,000 pieces of gold. Shadow silently replied in his heart. Not only throwing away 1,000 pieces of gold, wherever His Highness went, there would be people who secretly admired him. Beligaju unhurriedly drank a mouthful of tea. After being moistened by the tea, those originally delicate thin lips became even more moist. Under the illumination of dusk, they seemed to emit a faint radiance. It sounds like my qualifications are indeed not bad. Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. So you intend to engage in this industry? I can specially open a shop for you. Shadow. Wait a minute, why is this topic becoming more and more strange? Beligaju smiled. His left hand supported the table, and the slender fingers of his right hand clasped Hellion Vivian's chin without warning. His whole body tilted towards her direction.